Hi guys. Tonight we wander into the flickering glow of a medieval hall, where smoke curls above rough tables and the scent of tallow candles mixes with damp stone. Outside, the night stretches cold and deep, the kind of darkness that makes you wonder what's real and what's whispered. Somewhere between the creak of wooden beams and the hush of wind, a figure in a long cloak moves quietly, his face half hidden by the hood. He carries not a sword, but a bundle of parchment and a faint smell of crushed herbs. You probably won't survive this century, not with plagues, superstition, and bad dentistry, but at least you'll have some excellent bedtime stories to drift off with. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights and let your mind slow down to candle pace. You're standing in a great hall, lit by candles and torches that hiss and sputter. The air is thick with warmth and shadow. It's the 13th century, and the word wizard is spoken in half belief, half fear. You watch servants hurry between long tables, setting down trenchers of bread and bowls of steaming broth. At the high end sits a noble, and beside him, a figure who seems slightly out of place. He wears no armor, no priestly robes, yet all eyes linger on him. He's the court's wise man, a counselor of dreams and omens. Maybe he once studied medicine or philosophy, but tonight he's a magician in every sense the crowd imagines. The candles flicker as you lean closer. In this world, magic doesn't mean fireballs and lightning. It's the art of understanding the hidden threads between things. A wizard's reputation rests not on spectacle but on knowing when a comet appears, what herbs cure melancholy, and how the stars tilt toward fate. In a sense, he's part scientist, part therapist, and part stage illusionist. He listens more than he speaks. And when he finally does, his words land like pebbles in still water, rippling through the imagination of everyone present. A mainstream historical fact drifts into view. Most so-called wizards were literate men in an illiterate age, often trained at universities or monasteries. They studied natural philosophy, the medieval term for science, and believed that the universe was a grand, divine puzzle waiting to be decoded. You imagine them poring over dusty scrolls, muttering in Latin, trying to understand the way metals change color in fire or how the moon affects tides. It's all very serious until someone spills ale on their manuscript. Then comes the quirky side. One chronicler tells of a Welsh wizard who claimed he could summon fair weather by whistling through a hollow goosebone. Another wore a ring filled with powdered sapphire, supposedly to keep demons away. Such trinkets walk the line between charm and placebo, but in a world where storms destroyed crops and disease had no cure, people clung to anything that promised control. You glance again at the cloaked figure by the noble's side. His eyes flicker toward the firelight, then back to his parchment. Is he truly reading omens or simply reading faces? Historians still argue whether men like him truly believed their arts or used them as social armor, a way to maintain power through mystery. After all, knowledge in the Middle Ages was more precious than gold, and the fewer who understood the stars, the safer it was to speak with authority about them. You take a step closer to the hearth. Sparks drift upward like tiny planets. The wizard leans forward, whispering about a comet seen last month. The noble listens, fingers tight around his wine cup. To the Lord, the heavens are a ledger of divine messages. To the wizard, they are patterns he can almost explain. Somewhere between them lies faith and fear. You can smell the wax softening, the bread toasting at the fire's edge. A hound sighs near your feet. The wizard's voice flows like a low river, steady and soothing. He speaks of metals that grow in the earth as if alive, of spirits trapped in stones, of numbers that hum with divine proportion. Each sentence floats between reason and riddle. You realize how little difference there once was between what we now call science and what they called magic. In one corner, a jester rolls his eyes. In another, a monk mutters that such talk borders on heresy. Yet no one interrupts. Wizards, even the humble village kind, held a rare permission to blur boundaries. They were tolerated as long as they remained useful predicting weather, mixing salves, or interpreting dreams before battles. You could say they were medieval freelancers, always one bad client away from being accused of witchcraft. Outside the castle, night deepens. The stars stretch like silver dust, and you imagine countless others across Europe staring at the same constellations, wondering if the universe listens back. Somewhere in a small village, a mother prays for her child's fever to break, maybe clutching a charm sold by a wandering magus. The candle you've been watching burns lower. The wax pools, reflecting the trembling firelight like a liquid mirror. You let your thoughts drift. Perhaps magic was simply the language people used when logic ran out. The world was filled with mysteries then. Thunder without science, sickness without medicine, fate without psychology. Wizards provided comfort, not always answers. They reminded everyone that knowledge itself was a kind of spell, a way to push back the darkness, even if only for a moment. The wizard in the hall finishes his reading. The noble nods solemnly, as though fate itself has been confirmed. The musician in the corner plucks a slow tune. You can almost hear the sigh of relief ripple through the room. Whatever was said, whether about omens, harvests, or the stars, has soothed something deep in these people who live half in faith, half in fear. You glance once more at the flickering candles, feeling their warmth against your skin. Their small, stubborn light becomes a symbol of every scholar, mystic, and dreamer who ever tried to make sense of the chaos. The room smells of smoke, honey, and something ancient. Outside, an owl calls, and you think perhaps it's the night itself whispering secrets to anyone quiet enough to listen. You step softly, moving toward the hall's shadowed edge. The wizard has vanished into the darkness beyond the torchlight, his cloak brushing the floor like a sigh. Maybe he's gone to study the stars again, or to stir some silent brew that will never quite work. Still, you can't help feeling that something about him, about this entire age of flickering belief, lingers. The candles sputter, and your eyelids grow heavy. You wake to the sound of a rooster, faint and distant, echoing through misty fields. Morning light spills over the thatched roofs of a small medieval village. The air smells of damp hay and wood smoke, and your breath forms little clouds that drift away into the fog. This is the other side of the wizard's world, far from castles and courts. Here, the word magic feels softer, more domestic, and yet somehow more real. You wander past cottages built of wattle and daub, their walls patched like tired skin. Every door is carved with strange symbols, small crosses, spirals, or even the simple scratch of a knife. These are not decorations but quiet shields against the unknown. A hen clucks at your feet, and beyond the hedgerows, a woman bends over her herb garden, whispering to herself. She is the village wise one, the hedge wizard or cunning woman, and for generations, people have trusted her to heal wounds, bless fields, and untangle curses. You step closer. She looks up, her hands stained green from sage and thyme. Her eyes, grey and steady, give the sense that she already knows your question before you speak. She doesn't wear flowing robes or hold a staff. Instead, her tools are a bundle of herbs, a knife with a bone handle, and a few curious stones that glint faintly when the sun touches them. When someone falls ill, she mixes powders. When a cow refuses to give milk, she whispers over the pail. Her craft lives in the space between faith and folk knowledge, in the same rhythm as the seasons. The mainstream historical fact here is that such healers were often women, and they played an essential role in rural life throughout the Middle Ages. They kept practical medical knowledge alive long before physicians reached the countryside. Most of their spells were actually herbal recipes written down in memory rather than books. Mint for digestion, mugwort for sleep, willow bark for pain. Science, centuries later, would prove much of it effective. But in this world, knowledge without Latin carried suspicion. You crouch beside her table. A clay bowl holds something dark and sticky. She stirs it with care. Honey and soot, she murmurs, for the lungs. The mixture smells both sweet and strange, a bit like roasted chestnuts. She dips her finger, tastes it, and nods. It'll do. Then she laughs softly and gestures for you to sit. You realize that even laughter feels like magic here, something rare and practical at once. A quirky story floats through your drowsy mind. In one parish record from 15th century England, a healer claimed she could stop bleeding with the sign of St. Agnes. She would press her thumb to the wound and whisper a short verse that sounded half prayer, half rhyme. Sometimes it worked. People said she had the touch. Others said she had made a bargain. That tension between blessing and blasphemy followed these wise folk everywhere. The hedge wizard before you takes a different approach. She believes every plant has a soul. When she picks valerian, she apologizes to it. When she burns rosemary, she says it drives out bad spirits but also cleans the air. Her logic makes sense in a poetic way. She lives by patterns, moon cycles, tides, growth, decay. Historians still argue whether such practices were rooted in ancient paganism or simply an older form of rural science. The truth likely weaves between both, tangled like the roots of her herbs. She motions for you to help. You grind a handful of dried nettles in a wooden mortar, the texture rough and fragrant. She adds a drop of oil, a pinch of salt, and a whisper that sounds like gratitude. "It's not the words," she says quietly. "It's the will." You notice that she keeps a small charm around her neck, a tiny pouch tied with red thread. Inside might be salt, breadcrumbs, or a scrap of parchment. Whatever it holds, it feels heavier than its size, as though it carries not superstition but memory. Outside, a farmer arrives with worry in his eyes. His daughter, he says, has been feverish for days. The healer nods, listening, and gathers what she needs: a bottle of vinegar, a handful of elderflowers, a feather from a goose. She asks the farmer to bring fresh water from the stream. When he leaves, she turns to you. "If you speak gently," she says, "the sick can hear something beyond pain." You wonder if she means prayer, or maybe something simpler, kindness disguised as ritual. You follow her through the village. Children watch from doorways, whispering about her potions and powders. One boy crosses himself as she passes. She doesn't seem to notice. You reach the sick girl's house. The air is warm and heavy. The healer kneels by the bed, touches the girl's forehead, and begins to hum softly. No Latin, no dramatic gestures, just a rhythm that feels older than any church. She wipes the child's skin with vinegar and lays the elderflowers on her chest. The smell is clean and green, like spring rain. You see the tension in her hands, the patience in her breath. Later, outside, the farmer presses a few coins into her hand. She refuses them. "You'll need those," she says. "Pay me with milk when the cows give again." It's not charity exactly. It's the way the village balances its trust. As the sun sets, you sit beside her hut, watching smoke curl from the small chimney. The world here feels steady, humming quietly between nature and necessity. You realize how much of medieval life depended on people like her, half healer, half storyteller. She tells you about the time she predicted rain by the way snails climbed her wall, and how she once cured a night's rash with crushed poppy seeds and prayer. Her laugh returns, low and comforting. Before you leave, she hands you a small object wrapped in cloth. "A charm," she says, "for peaceful dreams." Inside is a single lavender sprig, tied with a thread of gold hair. You thank her, unsure whether to believe or simply to smile. The moon rises, pale and wide, casting silver on the thatched roofs. Somewhere, a wolf howls. You slip the charm into your pocket, feeling its faint warmth through the fabric. You think about how magic once grew quietly in gardens and kitchens, hidden inside the daily rhythm of ordinary lives. The wind carries the scent of thyme and smoke, and for a moment, everything feels suspended, half myth, half memory. You breathe in, slow and deep, as if the air itself has healing in it. The morning mist smells faintly of charcoal and melted wax. You follow a narrow path that winds behind the monastery wall and descends toward a cluster of workshops. The air grows heavier with every step, tinged with the scent of sulphur and vinegar. Somewhere ahead, glass shatters, followed by a muffled curse in Latin. You have reached the world of the alchemists, where science, superstition, and faith melt together inside glowing furnaces. Inside one of the dimly lit chambers, a figure bends over a table cluttered with instruments. Brass scales gleam beside glass flasks, and strange powders spill across parchment scribbled with symbols. This man is not a sorcerer in the storybook sense. He is an experimenter, part chemist, part dreamer. His robe is singed, his fingers stained black. He mutters calculations to himself, while a steady drip of condensation falls from the ceiling into a cracked basin. Historical evidence shows that alchemy was as much philosophy as it was chemistry. Medieval practitioners believed that all matter shared a divine essence, and if one could understand that essence, lead could become gold, sickness could become health, and ignorance could transform into enlightenment. The pursuit was never only about riches, it was also about purity of the soul, about finding the eternal within the material world. The alchemist you watch is heating a mixture of mercury and sulphur in a small crucible. He leans close, eyes bright, waiting for a sign. The smell is sharp enough to sting your nose. When the mixture sputters, he quickly adjusts the flame, whispering what sounds like a prayer or a mathematical formula. The line between the two is thin here. Every movement is careful, almost reverent. In his mind, the furnace is both laboratory and altar. From surviving manuscripts, we know that medieval alchemists recorded their experiments in a language that reads like poetry. They wrote of the marriage of metals, the green lion, and the red king, using allegory to hide both their knowledge and their failures. Some scholars think these metaphors protected secrets from the uninitiated. Others believe they were meant to describe inner transformation, not literal recipes. In truth, even the alchemists themselves may not have agreed. One curious anecdote tells of a French monk who claimed he had seen liquid gold flow from an ordinary pebble after 40 days of prayer and fasting. His abbot dismissed it as exhaustion, but word spread, and pilgrims came to see the stone. When the monk refused to show it, rumors grew that the devil had whispered the formula to him in a dream. No one ever found the pebble again, yet his name lingers in marginal notes centuries later, scribbled by men chasing the same shimmer. You wander deeper into the workshop. The walls are lined with shelves stacked with jars labelled in Latin: vitriol, sal ammoniac, aqua fortis. The light from the furnace makes the glass glow like jewels. The alchemist pauses to study a small text written in cramped handwriting. He traces the diagrams with a trembling finger. The pages smell of vinegar and ink. You realize that every discovery here comes at the price of patience, accidents, and sometimes poisoned lungs. Many experts remain divided on whether alchemists actually believed they could make gold. Some argue they were early scientists exploring metallurgy and medicine under the veil of secrecy. Others suggest they were mystics using metals as metaphors for human transformation. Perhaps both are true. After all, each experiment feels like a ritual of hope. You heat, you wait, you fail, and yet you try again. The process itself becomes sacred. The room grows hotter. Sweat beads along your neck. The alchemist lifts the crucible with tongs and pours the glowing mixture into a mold shaped like a coin. When it cools, he taps it gently, revealing a dull grey lump. His expression does not change. Failure is part of the craft. He sighs, then notes something on his parchment. A small smile flickers on his lips. To him, this grey lump is not failure but progress. Each attempt refines both the metal and the man. According to medieval chroniclers, some of these early experimenters were funded by nobles who dreamed of endless wealth. Others worked for the church, claiming that pure gold could fund holy wars. But there were also wanderers who lived on the edges of towns, offering to multiply silver for a price. They carried boxes of powders and strange promises, always moving before suspicion caught up. Some called them frauds, others called them visionaries. Both descriptions fit depending on the day. An odd story from Spain describes a young apprentice who accidentally discovered gunpowder while trying to imitate his master's alchemical process. He thought it was the philosopher's stone exploding in protest. When his eyebrows grew back, he swore never to touch sulfur again. Yet his mistake would change the course of warfare forever. You smile at the thought that a search for immortality could lead to such destructive invention. The irony burns brighter than any furnace. The alchemist wipes his brow and stares into the glowing coals. He speaks softly about the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. He believes they dance together inside every object, locked in endless cycles of birth and decay. His voice trembles with awe, as though describing music only he can hear. You realize that what drives him is not greed but curiosity, the need to find order in chaos, to glimpse divine intelligence in the glimmer of molten metal. A breeze sneaks through the open window, stirring the papers. The flame flutters, and for a moment you imagine faces in the smoke saints, demons, or perhaps nothing at all. The alchemist does not flinch. He keeps stirring. The rhythm of his work becomes hypnotic. You find yourself breathing in time with the crackle of fire, lulled by the sound of metal shifting state. The transformation feels symbolic, like watching thought become form. When the furnace finally dies down, he removes a small flask filled with something that glows faintly blue. It is not gold, not eternal life, not even a cure for the common plague. Yet he gazes at it with quiet triumph. Proof, he whispers, that matter listens. You almost ask what he means, but the look in his eyes suggests it would be pointless. Some truths are meant to be felt rather than explained. Night settles outside. The workshop cools. You can still smell ash and oil on your clothes. As you leave, you glance back at the dim light flickering through the small window. Somewhere inside, the alchemist begins again, his silhouette framed by the dance of fire. The quest continues, not for gold, but for understanding. Perhaps that is the true philosopher's stone, a mind that never stops seeking, even in failure. You step out into the night air, your lungs grateful to breathe something that does not taste like sulfur. The stars spill across the sky like crushed quartz, sharp and infinite. The wind carries the faint tolling of a distant bell, and you realize the hour is late. Yet in this age, night does not mean stillness. It means the sky is awake, and those who study it are only now beginning their work. You find yourself climbing a low hill where a lone wooden tower stands. At its top, a figure adjusts a brass instrument aimed toward the heavens. You hear the creak of gears and the soft scratching of quill against parchment. This is the astrologer, cousin to the alchemist, part scientist and part prophet. His job is to interpret the will of the cosmos for kings, priests, and peasants alike. From old university records we learn that astrology held enormous authority in medieval Europe. It was taught beside arithmetic and geometry, and no physician could properly diagnose without first consulting the patient's birth chart. To the people of this world, the stars were not distant fires but divine punctuation marks in the story of human life. Every movement of Jupiter or Mars carried meaning, and a well-trained astrologer could read those movements like scripture. You join the man in his tower. He looks up only briefly, nods, and returns to his work. His table is littered with charts, each one a maze of circles and tiny letters. Wax drips onto the edges, fixing the paper in place. A candle flickers beside a globe painted in faded blues and browns. His hands are steady, his eyes slightly glazed with fatigue. The sky, he murmurs, is patient. We are not. He points toward the constellation Orion, then to Venus rising like a slow ember. The soft glow outlines his face, half shadow, half reverence. If Venus is bright, he says, the crops will favor women this year. If Mars burns red, the kings will quarrel. It sounds superstitious at first, but you soon realize his predictions are carefully reasoned. They rest on centuries of observation, patterns recorded by scholars who pass their notes from one generation to the next. According to surviving star tables from the period, medieval astronomers often relied on Arabic and Persian manuscripts. These texts introduced mathematical precision into Europe's understanding of the heavens. The astrologer before you likely learned his craft from translations of scholars like al-Khwarizmi or al-Battani. His Latin notes are filled with Arabic numerals, proof of a knowledge that traveled continents before reaching this wooden tower. One curious story tells of a royal astrologer who predicted a nobleman's death during an eclipse. Terrified, the nobleman locked himself in his chamber with guards at every door. But as the moon darkened, a servant carrying wine stumbled, broke a glass, and cut the noble's throat by accident. Some said fate had found a loophole. Others said the astrologer merely guessed well. Even now, no one agrees if that tale is truth, or a parable meant to humble arrogance. You glance at the charts. Each line represents both science and faith. The astrologer marks the positions of planets with careful dots of ink, his handwriting looping like vines. His calculations depend on geometry, yet his conclusions drift into poetry. Mars in Capricorn. He mutters, means endurance through conflict. The mix of logic and mystery feels oddly soothing, as if numbers could calm chaos itself. There is still disagreement among modern historians about how seriously these predictions were taken. Some evidence suggests that rulers made decisions only after consulting their astrologers. Others think the readings were symbolic, more about reassurance than control. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between belief and comfort, the same place where people have always turned their fears into stories that make sense. A breeze stirs through the open window. The candle trembles, throwing shadows that move like ghosts across the ceiling. The astrologer sighs. The stars do not lie, he says quietly, but we often misread their handwriting. You can tell he has spent years wrestling with uncertainty. His shoulders are hunched, his fingers ink, stained, yet there is gentleness in him too, as if doubt itself has become his teacher. He invites you to peer through his astrolabe, a polished ring of brass etched with symbols. You tilt it toward the moon, aligning its edge with the pale disk. The metal feels cool against your skin. Through its circle, the moon looks enormous, bright enough to sting your eyes. The astrologer explains how to calculate its angle, how to track its motion through the zodiac. His voice is calm, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You begin to understand why people found comfort in such exactness. When everything else was uncertain, war, harvest, plague, the stars at least kept their appointments. An unexpected memory from a monastery chronicle comes to mind. A monk once scolded an apprentice for staying up to gaze idly at the moon. The apprentice replied that he was learning to measure God's clock. Instead of punishment, the monk gave him parchment and told him to record what he saw. That apprentice would later produce one of the earliest accurate lunar calendars in Europe. You smile at how rebellion sometimes becomes progress. The astrologer sits back, rubbing his tired eyes. He opens a small wooden box and takes out a silver pendant shaped like a seven-pointed star. 7 planets, 7 virtues. He says. Balance keeps madness away. The pendant glints in the candlelight, and you feel its weight in your imagination. To him, the world is not divided between science and belief. It is all one vast symphony, and he is trying to read the notes. Outside, Clouds drift across the sky. The stars blink in and out like slow heartbeats. You sense that centuries later, astronomers will still look up from observatories and feel the same mixture of awe and humility. The astrologer yawns, closes his ledger, and leans back against the wooden wall. His candle gutters out, leaving only the cold light of the moon through the open window. You sit in silence for a long time, the tower creaking beneath you. The universe above looks both infinite and intimate. You imagine how many hopes and fears have been written into those constellations. Perhaps every age projects its own dreams onto the sky. The astrologer is already asleep, his charts scattered like fallen leaves. You pull your cloak tighter, letting the sound of the night settle into you like a lullaby. The tower fades behind you as dawn begins to wash the landscape in soft blue light. The road ahead winds through fields dotted with frost and ends at the gates of an ancient abbey. Its stone walls rise pale and silent, streaked with moss. A faint scent of beeswax and parchment lingers even outside the gate. Inside those walls lies a treasure far rarer than gold, knowledge carefully guarded, written in the ink of patience and secrecy. You step through the cloister archway. Monks move like shadows beneath the colonnade, their sandals whispering against cold stone. The sound is rhythmic, steady, almost hypnotic. One of them gestures for silence as he passes. Beyond him, a small doorway leads to the scriptorium, the room where manuscripts are copied by hand. It smells of ink, vellum, and the faint smoke of oil lamps. You hear the soft rasp of quills and the slow turning of pages. Here, in this dim light, the past and future are being written at the same time. From surviving inventories, we know that many medieval libraries hid more than just religious works. Among the psalters and sermons were texts filled with alchemical recipes, astrological charts, and coded references to the natural world. The Church did not always forbid such studies, but it demanded they be cloaked in devotion. A monk who wrote about planetary influences would often disguise it as a commentary on divine order. Even curiosity required a halo. At one table, an elderly monk bends over a thick manuscript. The gold leaf on his page catches the lamplight, dazzling for an instant before fading again. You watch as he dips his quill into ink, made from crushed oak galls and iron salts. The motion is slow and deliberate. Each letter seems to breathe. He is copying a book that has passed through many hands, and you can almost feel the weight of its lineage pressing down on the parchment. According to marginal notes found in such books, monks often left secret messages between the lines. A tiny sketch of a dragon might mark a paragraph about dangerous experiments. A small cluster of stars could hint at forbidden cosmology. One curious note found in a 12th century text reads, "Be silent, O reader, for not all light is holy." You wonder what the monk who wrote it feared, or what he had seen that others were not meant to. An unusual detail about these libraries is that they sometimes included chained books. Heavy iron links kept them bound to the desks, protecting them from theft. Knowledge, it seems, was precious enough to imprison. Yet those same chains also symbolized control. Only a few were allowed to read, fewer still to question, and almost none to write freely. You trace a finger along one of the metal links and feel the cold reminder that wisdom and restriction often grew side by side. There is ongoing debate among scholars about how aware these monks were of the magical undertones in the texts they preserved. Some believe they copied them mechanically, treating even occult manuscripts as part of their duty to preserve all written word. Others think certain scribes understood the coded symbols perfectly and hid them under religious language. Perhaps the truth lies in the quiet pride visible on that old monk's face as he completes another line. He may not call it sorcery, but he knows it feels like creation. A soft cough breaks the silence. Another monk approaches, younger, nervous. He places a small folded sheet on the elder's desk and whispers something before retreating. The elder unfolds it carefully. Inside are strange drawings, circles within circles, letters twisted into unfamiliar shapes. You recognize it as a sigil, a diagram meant to represent hidden forces. The old man studies it without expression, then slowly tucks it between the pages of a psalm book. Whatever its meaning, it will be preserved in the safest possible hiding place. One curious anecdote from a monastic chronicle tells of a brother who refused to destroy a pagan text ordered for burning. Instead, he copied it into the margins of a Latin sermon, line by line, disguised as commentary. Centuries later, that hidden fragment would help historians reconstruct a lost Greek treatise on medicine. The irony is beautiful in its quiet defiance. Even obedience can hide rebellion if written with care. You move through the scriptorium, watching as the light shifts across the desks. The monks' faces glow with concentration. Occasionally one looks up to stretch his fingers or mouth a silent prayer. The rhythm of quills scratching becomes almost like rain. You can sense the deep peace of their work, even if it is tinged with secrecy. Each stroke of ink feels like a heartbeat in a long, patient body of knowledge. In the corner, a small shelf holds unfinished manuscripts. You recognize some as Bibles, others as bestiaries filled with impossible creatures. One shows a lion with a human face, another a serpent biting its own tail. These images are not meant to deceive. They are attempts to explain mysteries through pictures. Medieval imagination did not separate the spiritual from the natural. The visible world was only a mirror of the invisible one. A fascinating record from the 14th century describes a monk in Florence who illustrated comets as angels with burning swords. To him, the universe was alive, its symbols overlapping. If he had seen a telescope, he might have called it a relic rather than a tool. You realize how different yet familiar their curiosity was. They sought patterns, connections, meaning the same thing we still chase, though we now use different words. The elder monk finishes his page. He sprinkles fine sand over the wet ink to dry it, then lifts the parchment with trembling hands. His eyes gleam with pride. "A good line," he whispers to no one. You lean closer and see that the text reads, "God hides his wisdom in every grain of dust." The words are simple, but carry the quiet conviction that even the smallest act of writing can be sacred. Outside the window, the first sunlight slants through the arches, illuminating the tiny motes of dust floating in the air. They shimmer like stars in miniature. You understand why the monks saw holiness in their work. To copy a book was to keep the universe from forgetting itself. Even the secrets, even the strange diagrams tucked between psalms, were part of that fragile memory. You step back into the cloister. The bells begin to ring for prayer, echoing through the stone halls. The monks rise from their desks and file out slowly, their robes brushing the floor in perfect rhythm. You feel a hush settle behind them, as if the building itself exhales. The scent of ink and candle smoke lingers on your hands. Somewhere deep inside those walls, the hidden knowledge sleeps, waiting for another set of eyes to wake it centuries later. You linger in the cloister garden after the monks file out for their prayers. The air smells of rosemary and damp stone, and a thin drizzle has begun to fall. You can hear the rain tapping gently against the stained glass windows, soft as the ticking of an ancient clock. The abbey feels alive, humming with the energy of thoughts too dangerous to speak aloud. You imagine the walls holding centuries of whispered ideas, their secrets sealed beneath layers of devotion. You follow a narrow passage that leads toward a darker wing of the abbey. The floor beneath your feet is uneven, polished by countless sandals. The corridor opens into a small chamber filled with shelves of scrolls and manuscripts. This is the forbidden section, though no sign marks it as such. A single candle burns on the table, and beside it sits a monk with ink-stained fingers and eyes too bright for someone who has taken vows of silence. He gestures for you to sit. The air smells faintly of myrrh and dust, On the table before him lies a manuscript covered with geometric symbols and strange diagrams of circles interlaced with Latin words. He points to one and whispers, "These are not spells, they are reflections." His voice is low, careful, as if the walls might be listening. You understand that he is speaking of more than faith. He is speaking of knowledge that hides behind language. Historical documents from several abbeys suggest that many monks quietly pursued natural philosophy under the veil of piety. Astronomy, medicine, and alchemy were sometimes disguised as religious meditation. When questioned, they would claim they were contemplating the perfection of divine creation. Their curiosity was a kind of prayer, their experiments acts of devotion. The line between science and worship barely existed at all. The monk beside you opens another parchment. It is filled with drawings of herbs and small notes written in a mixture of Latin and an older tongue. "The shape of a leaf," he says softly, "mirrors the design of the heavens." His eyes shine as he traces the veins with his finger. You sense that he believes this completely. To him, every pattern in nature is a message, a correspondence between the earthly and the divine. A peculiar story preserved in a 13th century chronicle describes how one abbot secretly funded monks to copy Arabic texts on mathematics and medicine. These manuscripts traveled disguised inside covers of hymnals so that the guards of the Inquisition would not notice. Centuries later, the abbey's garden was still known for its miraculous remedies. Few remembered that those cures had begun as translations of Islamic science. The monk pours you a cup of thin wine and smiles. "All truth," he says, "belongs to God, even when it hides in forbidden words." His tone carries no rebellion, only calm certainty. You begin to see how fragile and daring their curiosity was. Every experiment, every scribbled note on planetary motion could be misread as sin. And yet they continued, driven by the quiet conviction that understanding creation was the purest form of worship. Some historians suggest that without these monastic scholars, much of the ancient world's knowledge would have vanished. They copied texts by Plato, Galen, and Ptolemy, often without fully grasping their meaning. But even imperfect copying was preservation. What they did not understand, they protected for someone else to rediscover later. You think of them as human bridges, stretched across centuries, fragile but enduring. A striking little detail from one abbey's archive mentions that some monks used coded color systems in their illuminated letters. Blue ink might mark theological commentary, while gold signaled material that strayed close to natural philosophy. It was their quiet way of cataloguing danger. The book before you seems to shimmer faintly with that same secret code. Its golden letters pulse softly in the candlelight, like tiny hearts. The monk suddenly closes the book and looks at you with a mixture of amusement and caution. "Knowledge," he murmurs, "can bless or burn." He glances toward the door as footsteps echo faintly in the corridor. His hand trembles slightly as he hides the manuscript under his sleeve. The visitor who enters a moment later wears a cross carved from ivory. He nods curtly, asks a few questions in Latin, then leaves. The monk exhales slowly and smiles at you again. "You see," he whispers, "even faith must wear masks." You sit together in silence. The candle's flame bends as if breathing. The walls seem to hum with the memory of those who have read and written in secrecy. The monk dips his quill once more and begins to copy a passage in deliberate strokes. Each letter feels like a heartbeat. The rain continues outside, a steady rhythm that mingles with the scratch of the quill. An old proverb from a Benedictine manuscript comes to your mind. Ink is the shadow of light. You finally understand what it means. To record something is to trap a bit of illumination before it disappears. The monks in this hidden room are doing exactly that, catching light in words that others might never see. You watch as he finishes the last line of his page, then carefully presses it flat with a wooden ruler. The ink glistens briefly before dulling. He looks satisfied, not triumphant, just quietly fulfilled. "To write," he says, "is to remember what the soul already knows." His words settle into you like warmth spreading through the cold air. When you leave the chamber, the corridor feels longer than before. The chanting of the other monks echoes faintly from the chapel. You pass a window and notice the rain has stopped, leaving the garden glistening under pale sunlight. The herbs shimmer as though blessed. Somewhere behind you, the monk's candle flickers out, and the scent of ink lingers in the air like the ghost of thought itself. As you step into the courtyard, you realize that much of what survives from this world endures not because it was celebrated, but because it was hidden. Knowledge, like fire, needed both shelter and courage to stay alive. You walk on, your footsteps soft against the stones, carrying that quiet defiance with you as the bells toll again in the distance. The bells fade behind you as you follow a dirt path leading away from the abbey. Mist curls across the fields, wrapping the land in pale silence. In the distance, banners ripple above a stone fortress, and you can already hear the faint music of lutes drifting from within. The air smells of wet grass and roasted meat. You are approaching the world of nobles and kings, where knowledge wears velvet and superstition is dressed as ceremony. You pass under an archway into the great hall. Firelight dances across tapestries embroidered with beasts and constellations. The chatter of courtiers fills the air, but their laughter dies as a man enters, wearing a robe of deep blue and holding a staff carved from ash wood. The crowd parts for him. He is not a knight, nor a priest, but something in between. His eyes glint with intelligence and quiet confidence. Everyone calls him the royal astrologer, though people whisper the word magician when they think no one is listening. Contemporary records tell us that medieval courts often employed men like him. They were part mathematician, part advisor, and occasionally part illusionist. Kings trusted them to interpret omens, to choose the right day for a coronation, or to mix a potion to heal melancholy. These men occupied a precarious position. Their wisdom was valued, but their mystery invited suspicion. Too much success, and envy would follow. Too much failure, and the stake awaited. The court magician moves toward the throne, his robe brushing the floor. He carries a small brass sphere, the kind used to demonstrate planetary motion. The king, a heavy man with a jeweled crown, watches with curiosity. "Tell me," the king says, "when shall I ride to war?" The magician bows slightly, placing the sphere on the table. The candlelight gleams off its metal rings. "Your Majesty," he says, "the stars favor patience. Mars burns too brightly. Wait until the moon is young again." According to a chronicle from the late 14th century, monarchs consulted such readings before major decisions. Astrology shaped politics as much as strategy did. When the English King Edward III launched his campaign in France, his astrologer had already chosen an hour of victory for the first battle. Whether coincidence or design, the army triumphed, and the astrologer's reputation soared. It is easy to see how a clever man could wield enormous influence in this uncertain world. One strange anecdote from a court in Bohemia describes a magician who created a mirror said to reveal betrayal. When the queen looked into it, she claimed she saw her husband with another woman. The king smashed the mirror in fury, only to find it empty of reflection. The magician vanished that night, leaving behind only shards and legend. Even now, historians debate whether this was a trick of optics or an elaborate performance to manipulate power. The magician before you works in subtler ways. His table is filled with powders, vials, and small bundles of herbs tied with silk. He selects one and drops it into a cup of wine. The liquid fizzes and glows faintly. The courtiers gasp. "For courage," he says with a small smile. The king drinks, and the hall breaks into relieved laughter. You notice that the magician does not drink himself. His expression remains calm, distant, as if his true thoughts lie far beyond this noisy chamber. From royal letters preserved in archives, we learn that such advisors often doubled as spies. They carried coded messages disguised as horoscopes or love charms. Their knowledge of symbols and mathematics made them perfect couriers for secrets. One document from France mentions a wise man of the stars who smuggled battle plans inside a diagram of the zodiac. Few could read it, and fewer would dare question it. A curious rumor from Italian courts claims that some magicians prepared talking heads made of bronze, devices powered by hidden bellows and wires. These contraptions could appear to speak simple phrases when heated by candles. The illusion was enough to convince nobles that their magus communed with angels. Whether or not such machines truly existed, the story reveals how the line between wonder and deception blurred easily under candlelight. Scholars remain divided on whether these royal advisors were true believers in their arts or clever performers who understood psychology better than anyone. Perhaps they were both. The magician at this feast watches every gesture, every flicker of doubt on the king's face, as if reading a private constellation written in human expression. His magic is not only in his tools, but in his timing. The hall quiets as he steps forward again. "Majesty," he says softly, "I have seen a dream in the stars. There will come a storm, but if you hold faith, it shall pass." The courtiers murmur. The king nods gravely, his confidence renewed. The magician turns away, concealing a faint smile. His words have cost nothing but may save his life. You stand near the window, watching the snow begin to fall outside. The night presses close against the stained glass, turning the colors of saints and angels into fragments of shifting light. Behind you, laughter rises again, the tension forgotten. The magician slips quietly through a side door, disappearing into the shadows. Later, you find him alone in a narrow corridor, removing his heavy robe. Without the trappings of ceremony, he looks tired, almost fragile. "Kings need omens," he says softly, "because truth frightens them." He pours wine into a cup and offers it to you. "Do you believe the stars decide?" he asks. You hesitate. His eyes meet yours, calm and knowing. "Neither do I," he says, smiling faintly, "but they listen." Outside, the snow thickens, blanketing the courtyard in silence. The candles in the hall gutter and fade. You imagine him returning to his chamber, opening his secret notebooks filled with equations, dreams, and perhaps a few lies that have become truths with time. His kind will vanish one day, replaced by scientists and bureaucrats. Yet the spark he carries, the hunger to make meaning from mystery, will survive. As you walk away from the castle, the night feels softer, almost kind. The snow glows faintly under the moon. Somewhere behind you, a single window stays lit, and you know the magician is still awake, charting the invisible sky that hovers just beyond human reason. The road from the castle winds downward, through sleeping villages and frost-covered fields. You follow it until the air thickens with the scent of wood smoke and something faintly metallic, like old coins and rain. A new kind of magic lives here, humbler but no less serious. You hear it in the creak of doors, the hush of whispered charms, and the clinking of glass jars lined up on crooked shelves. A cottage stands at the edge of the woods, its windows glowing faintly. Inside, bottles of coloured liquid catch the firelight like jewels. The shelves are crowded with feathers, bones, herbs, and curious tokens. A woman stirs a pot over the hearth, muttering softly to herself. Her cat curls at her feet, tail flicking lazily. This is the world of folk magic, of charms and witch bottles and protection spells that smell of smoke and vinegar. Parish records from the 16th century reveal that almost every village had someone who understood these rituals. They were not grand sorcerers, but everyday guardians of small miracles. Their charms promised safety from storms, luck in childbirth, or protection against illness. The church frowned but tolerated them as long as they stayed useful and quiet. The people, however, trusted them far more than they trusted distant priests. The woman lifts the lid of a small clay jar. Inside floats a strange mixture of pins, nails, and hair sealed in thick liquid. "For turning back envy," she says softly. You bury it by the doorstep, mouth toward the sunrise. Her voice is steady, almost motherly. You realize that every object in this room carries both fear and hope, held together by ritual. One curious detail from an English court record tells of a farmer who found such a bottle buried beneath his barn floor. It contained rusted needles, a scrap of parchment, and what appeared to be a frog bone. The villagers insisted it had trapped a curse meant for his cattle. He reburied it immediately, too afraid to disturb it further. No one dared question its power again. The wise woman moves to a table covered with dried herbs. She begins to crumble rosemary and bay leaves into a bowl. For peace in the home, she explains. She mixes them with salt and whispers a rhyme that sounds more like a lullaby than a spell. The rhythm of her words fills the small cottage, warm and steady. You can almost feel the tension in the air easing, like a tightened string slowly unwinding. Written fragments from medieval household manuals suggest that even nobles kept small collections of such charms. A pouch of salt for purity, a sprig of rue pinned to a baby's cradle, or an amulet shaped like a hand to ward off evil eyes. These items were passed quietly from mother to daughter, more family tradition than heresy. The language of superstition was universal, whispered in kitchens, stables, and fields alike. A remarkable story from Germany tells of a mason who built secret charms into the foundations of cathedrals, tiny bones, bits of iron, and carved runes meant to keep demons from entering holy ground. Centuries later, restorers found these hidden tokens sealed within the stones. It seems even the builders of sacred spaces hedged their bets against unseen forces. The woman in the cottage now holds up a small pouch made of red fabric. "This one keeps nightmares away," she says with a knowing smile. She ties it shut with twine and hangs it above the bed. You see, fear listens. It must be spoken to kindly, or it lingers. You find her words simple yet profound. Perhaps the truest magic is not about control at all, but about making peace with uncertainty. There remains debate among historians about whether such practices were remnants of ancient pagan faiths or simply expressions of human psychology. Some scholars call them early forms of therapy, ways of giving shape to fear. Others insist they were continuations of older spiritual traditions. Either way, they worked, at least in the sense that people believed they did, and belief itself can change everything. The fire crackles, and the scent of rosemary thickens. Outside, snow begins to fall, soft and slow. The woman hums an old tune as she cleans her tools. You notice how her movements carry the rhythm of ritual, measured, unhurried, certain. Even her silence seems intentional. You begin to feel that her cottage is less a house than a living prayer, built of repetition and trust. A curious little tale from a village in Italy tells of a midwife who was accused of witchcraft after she used a charm made from melted wax to ease a difficult birth. When questioned, she insisted it was nothing but a symbol of calm. The court released her with a warning, and for years afterward, the villagers whispered that her wax figure had saved more than one life. The wise woman offers you tea brewed from chamomile and mint. The steam smells fresh and comforting. "Drink," she says. "It keeps away restlessness." You sip it slowly, feeling warmth spread through you. She smiles. That is the only spell that never fails. For a moment, the world outside feels far away. No kings, no scholars, no wars. Only this small room pulsing with quiet life. Before you leave, she presses a small object into your hand. It is a piece of iron shaped like a heart. "Hang it near your window," she says. Iron remembers sunlight. The phrase makes no logical sense, yet it feels entirely true. You tuck it safely into your pocket. As you step outside, the snow crunches under your boots. The cottage door closes behind you, and the glow from its window fades into the white night. You can still smell herbs clinging to your clothes, sharp and clean. Somewhere in the forest, an owl hoots, and the world feels perfectly balanced between fear and faith. You walk on, warmed by the thought that every age has its own way of talking to the dark. The road leads you to the edge of a bustling town, its rooftops patched with frost, and its narrow streets echoing with the chatter of apprentices and merchants. Bells ring from the spire of a nearby cathedral, mingling with the clang of hammers from distant forges. The scent of ink and parchment hangs in the air. This is a university town, and tonight you find yourself wandering toward the heart of medieval scholarship, where curiosity hums like a barely contained flame. You step through the arched gate of a college courtyard. The cobblestones glisten in the lantern light, slick from earlier rain. Students hurry past in cloaks too thin for the cold, their arms filled with books and scrolls. Laughter, debate, and the creak of old doors blend into a single restless rhythm. Here, ideas are currency, and sleep is a luxury none can afford. Records from Bologna, Paris, and Oxford tell us that medieval universities were both rigorous and chaotic. They were places where theology sat beside astronomy, medicine beside alchemy. Knowledge was treated as a grand puzzle, every discipline a different piece waiting to fit together. Professors lectured in Latin to rooms filled with eager, exhausted students, each scribbling notes on scraps of parchment by candlelight. You follow one such student into a narrow building that smells of wax, wool, and damp paper. His name is Peter, though everyone calls him the Owl because he never seems to rest. His chamber is little more than a bed, a chest, and a small table piled with texts. On the top lies a copy of Aristotle's Physics, beside a worn grimoire filled with diagrams of circles and symbols that do not belong to philosophy alone. He smiles at you, eyes bright with sleepless excitement. They say truth hides between subjects, he says, so I read everything. According to correspondence preserved from the period, students often dabbled in what was politely called experimental philosophy. In practice, it meant mixing alchemical tinctures, testing magnetism, and even attempting minor illusions to demonstrate natural laws. The lines between curiosity and heresy were dangerously thin, but youth rarely fears boundaries. Peter lights a candle and shows you a set of glass flasks. I borrowed these from the apothecary, he confides, though his grin suggests theft is more accurate. Inside one flask, colored vapors swirl like living smoke. Sulfur and salt, he says proudly. If I can make them balance, perhaps I can make metal breathe. His words echo the dreams of countless seekers who came before him. One account from a Paris student in the early 14th century tells of a lecture that ended in chaos when a demonstration of distillation exploded, covering everyone in rose oil and soot. The master declared it a divine sign against vanity, but the students wrote songs about it for weeks. You can almost imagine Peter doing the same, half learning, half rebelling, always chasing wonder. A rare letter from a university rector notes that alchemy was tolerated as long as it was framed as the study of God's hidden architecture. Scholars understood that the cosmos was ordered by divine logic, and to uncover that order was to glimpse a fragment of eternity. Yet the same letter warns that unrestrained curiosity leads the soul astray. It is easy to see how learning in this world was both liberation and temptation. Peter pulls a worn piece of parchment from his chest. It is a chart mapping the relationship between planets, metals, and human emotions. Gold corresponds to the sun and courage, silver to the moon and purity, Mercury to intellect. It all connects, he whispers. The heavens, the body, the heart. If I can trace the pattern, I will understand everything. His faith in knowledge is almost tender, fragile in its intensity. Historians continue to discuss whether such connections were taken literally or metaphorically. Some scholars argue that students like Peter believed in physical influence between stars and souls. Others think it was simply a poetic framework for understanding nature. Perhaps it was both a reminder that beauty and reason once spoke the same language. You glance around his room. On the windowsill sits a tiny crucifix, beside a jar filled with pebbles shaped like stars. On the wall hangs a sketch of a wheel divided into 12 parts, labeled with Latin zodiac names. His world is a blend of faith and inquiry. and he moves through it with the devotion of someone praying through study. He asks if you wish to see his secret library. You nod, and he pulls aside a loose board beneath the bed. Inside the hollow space are several thin manuscripts, their covers cracked and fragile. One is a translation of an Arabic text on optics. Another bears strange symbols that seem to shimmer faintly in the lamplight. They say light itself can teach the soul, he murmurs. I believe that. A curious story from Bologna tells of a student who was expelled for claiming the stars moved not because of angels but because of mathematics. Decades later, his theory became accepted science. You smile at the thought that every heresy is sometimes just the future arriving early. The candle burns low as Peter continues speaking, his hands trembling from excitement rather than cold. He describes a dream he once had of a great library beneath the earth, filled with books that glowed from within. Perhaps knowledge is alive, he says softly. Perhaps it chooses who finds it. His words sound fanciful, but you can sense the truth beneath them. Every discovery feels like something that has been waiting to be remembered. When dawn begins to filter through the small window, Peter finally stops talking. His eyelids droop, and he falls asleep at his desk, his quill still in hand. You look down at his notes, filled with formulas, verses, and doodles of stars. He has no idea that his restless curiosity mirrors generations before and after him, all linked by the same longing to know what lies behind the veil of ordinary things. As you leave the chamber, the first bells of morning echo through the courtyard. Students stumble out of their rooms, yawning and laughing. The air smells of bread and ink. You glance back once, seeing the faint glow of candlelight through Peter's window. Somewhere inside, another young mind dreams of equations and angels. You smile, realizing that the thirst for wonder has always kept the world awake. The city fades behind you as you follow a path into rolling hills brushed with mist. The air is cool and smells of wet earth and distant pine. A few scattered cottages cling to the slopes, and beyond them, the ruins of a great stone circle rise from the grass like the bones of a forgotten legend. Somewhere in the quiet, a story waits for you. It is one that has been told so many times it has stopped belonging to any single place or person. Tonight, it belongs to you. You walk closer, boots sinking into the damp ground. The stones stand tall, their surfaces carved with spirals and faint, weathered marks. In the center of the circle, a single oak tree grows, its branches twisting like fingers toward the sky. The wind sighs through the leaves, and you imagine an old voice whispering. This is where people still speak of Merlin, not the glittering wizard of fairy tales, but the shadowed figure who once walked between myth and memory. Medieval chronicles written in Latin speak of him as both prophet and madman. Some claim he lived in the 6th century, advising kings and predicting wars. Others place him centuries later, a poet turned hermit who fled the world after seeing too much bloodshed. Whatever the truth, his name became a vessel into which every hope, fear, and mystery of the age could be poured. A Welsh poem from the 12th century describes him wandering the forest, his hair tangled with leaves, speaking to birds and trees. The locals called him Murd in the Wild. They said he could read the language of the wind and foretell death by the sound of rivers. It sounds like madness until you remember that, in those times, solitude itself was considered a kind of divine conversation. A curious tale preserved by Geoffrey of Monmouth tells of Merlin's birth to a mortal woman and a spirit of the air. Because of this, he was said to possess the wisdom of both heaven and earth. The story may have been allegory, or perhaps a veiled warning about those who claimed knowledge beyond what the church allowed. Some scholars believe the legend was based on several real figures whose lives were later woven together. Others argue he never existed at all, except as the embodiment of humankind's hunger for guidance in uncertain times. You sit on a moss-covered stone and watch the light shift across the horizon. The world feels ancient here, still humming with the energy of old words. You can almost hear him, speaking in a calm voice to a weary king, urging patience while the stars realign. The image is comforting, even though you know no spell could have saved Britain from its wars. Perhaps that is why Merlin endures, not because he succeeded, but because he represents the dream that wisdom might one day be enough. From fragments of early manuscripts, we know that stories of Merlin evolved alongside the growth of medieval magic itself. He began as a seer, then became an alchemist, an engineer, and finally a symbol of the learned man misunderstood by his age. In later retellings, he builds Stonehenge through geometry and song, creates potions that reveal truth, and raises kings from prophecy. Every century reshaped him to fit its own longing for wonder. A peculiar story recorded by a travelling monk describes a cave deep in the Welsh mountains, where villagers claimed Merlin still slept, surrounded by books that turned their own pages. Once every 100 years, someone would hear him whispering beneath the earth, asking if the world was wiser yet. No one ever answered loudly enough. You trace one of the carvings on the nearest stone. It feels rough beneath your fingers, like skin weathered by centuries of wind. The design resembles the shape of an eye, half hidden beneath moss. You wonder who made it, and whether they believed they were calling upon the spirit of knowledge, or simply leaving a mark for beauty's sake. Perhaps those things were never separate. There is an old argument among historians about whether Merlin's image was used to defend or to question authority. Some claim he symbolized divine counsel, legitimizing kings through prophecy. Others think he represented the danger of unrestrained wisdom, the scholar who flies too close to forbidden truths. Both readings feel true depending on the moment in history. What matters is that his story always returns when people feel uncertain about who to trust. A chill wind moves through the stones, carrying the faint scent of rain. The oak tree rustles as if exhaling. You close your eyes for a moment, and in that silence, you imagine him standing beside you, older than time, robes frayed, eyes bright with quiet humor. Magic, he says softly, is only the patience to listen when the world speaks slowly. The voice fades, but the words remain. A legend from northern France claims that a glass tower stands hidden by enchantment in the middle of a lake. Inside, Merlin dreams endlessly, keeping watch over the balance of the world. When the waters ripple, it means he is turning a page in one of his eternal books. Fishermen still swear they have seen the glow of candlelight under the surface on calm nights. You open your eyes and notice how the mist thickens around the stones. The air hums with a strange vibration, part wind, part memory. You realize that places can remember stories even when people forget them. The ground beneath your feet feels alive, as though the soil itself is holding on to old words that refuse to die. When you finally stand to leave, the world has grown quiet again. The oak sways gently, its leaves dripping with dew. The horizon burns faintly gold where dawn begins to rise. You take one last look at the stone circle and feel as though you have stepped out of time. Somewhere in the distance, a crow calls, and you think you hear a whisper that could be laughter or simply the wind passing through ancient names. As you walk away, the first light of morning catches the carvings on the stones, and for a moment they gleam like letters in a book you almost understand. Perhaps Merlin was never a man at all, but a language the world invented to describe its own longing to be known. The dawn brightens as you descend from the hills, the cold wind carrying the scent of sand and spice. The air feels different here, warmer, filled with the faint hum of a caravan bell in the distance. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself far from the mist of Britain, crossing golden dunes where the sky blazes like molten copper. The story now travels east, following the trail of wisdom that once flowed from Baghdad to Cordoba, from the sands of Arabia to the libraries of Europe. You find yourself standing at the edge of a city that glows in the heat. Its walls shimmer under the sun, and domes of turquoise rise above the skyline. In the marketplace, you hear the calls of merchants selling paper, ink, and brass instruments shaped like stars. The smell of dates and frankincense mingles with dust. This is the world of the Arabic alchemists and translators, whose work would become the heartbeat of medieval science. Historical evidence shows that during the 8th and 9th centuries, scholars under the Abbasid caliphs gathered ancient texts from Greece, Persia, and India. They translated them into Arabic and expanded upon their ideas. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, thinkers studied mathematics, medicine, and alchemy side by side, guided by the belief that all knowledge came from one divine source. They preserved what Europe had nearly forgotten and added insights of their own. You follow a scholar through the arched doorway of a library. The cool air inside smells of papyrus and ink. Shelves stretch upward, filled with scrolls and bound manuscripts. The scholar, dressed in a flowing robe, places a brass astrolabe on the table. "This," he says softly, "is how we read the sky." His hands move gently over the device, aligning its plates. Each star has a name, and every name carries a story. From preserved treatises, we know that Arabic astronomers mapped the heavens with remarkable precision. They gave names to stars that are still used today: Aldebaran, Altair, Vega. Their measurements improved upon Ptolemy's work and helped sailors navigate across oceans. Yet many of these scholars were also alchemists, searching not for gold, but for the essence of perfection. To them, science and spirituality were not enemies, but reflections of each other. A curious legend tells of Jabir ibn Hayyan, sometimes called Geber in later Latin texts. He was said to have written over 100 works on chemistry, astrology, and philosophy. Some claim he discovered how to create elixirs that could purify metals and souls alike. Others believe he never existed as a single person, but represented an entire tradition of thinkers who signed their work with one shared name. Either way, the legacy of Jabir changed the world. The scholar in front of you unrolls a piece of parchment filled with intricate drawings of flasks, retorts, and furnaces. The body, he says, is made of the same matter as the stars. When we study one, we learn about the other. His words carry a rhythm that feels both mystical and logical. You realize how their view of the universe differed from that of the fearful monasteries of the West. Here, curiosity is not suspicion, it is faith in motion. One vivid account from Cordoba describes scholars working late into the night, translating Greek works into Arabic by lamplight, while students copied them into Latin for future generations. The room would glow gold with oil lamps, the air heavy with the scent of ink. They spoke softly in many languages, bridging centuries with every line they wrote. When those translations reached Europe, they became the foundation of Renaissance thought. There remains some disagreement among historians about how much of medieval European science directly descended from Arabic alchemy. Some argue that without it, the later discoveries of chemistry and optics would never have taken shape. Others believe Europe would eventually have found its own way, but the manuscripts themselves tell a simple truth. Knowledge flows like water, always finding new paths when blocked. The scholar leads you to a courtyard where a fountain murmurs beside a grove of fig trees. Around it, students debate quietly, their robes brushing the stone. You catch fragments of words: soul, mercury, motion, perfection. One student draws circles in the dust with a stick, explaining that transformation in metal mirrors transformation in the human heart. His teacher smiles approvingly, then quotes a verse from the Quran: "He who taught by the pen taught man what he knew not." You feel the reverence in their tone, a devotion to understanding that feels both holy and human. A delightful detail from an old traveler's diary mentions that scholars here often scented their ink with musk or rose oil, believing that pleasant fragrance invited clarity of thought. You imagine the soft perfume rising from the manuscripts, the scent of learning itself. It feels luxurious and sacred at once, a kind of worship through beauty. As the afternoon heat settles, the scholar opens another manuscript and points to the Latin words written in the margins. These, he says, were added by a Christian monk who came here to study. He wrote that truth is a bridge between tongues. You picture that monk returning home with a trunk full of papers, carrying the seeds of ideas that would later bloom in European universities. The call to prayer rises in the distance, a sound that vibrates through the air like music. The scholar bows his head for a moment, then looks up and smiles. In the end, he says, we all search for light, some through faith, some through fire, some through ink. You nod, feeling the simplicity of his wisdom settle deep inside you. As evening descends, you step out into the narrow streets again. Lanterns glow amber in doorways, and the scent of bread baking fills the air. The marketplace quiets, but the stars above seem to awaken, bright and sharp. You recognize some of their names from the scholar's lesson. The sky feels both ancient and newly alive. You walk on, the sand crunching beneath your feet. Behind you, the library's windows glimmer faintly, and you imagine rows of manuscripts whispering softly to one another in the dark. Somewhere within those walls, the dream of understanding continues, written in 100 hands, across 100 languages. And as the night deepens, you realize that knowledge, like magic, survives by changing shape. The night stretches wide above you, a dark velvet canopy stitched with silver light. You walk along a winding path that follows the edge of a quiet river. The water reflects the stars so clearly it looks like a sky turned upside down. Somewhere nearby, faint music drifts from a small chapel where monks are singing in Latin. The sound floats across the water, soft as breath. You pause to listen, and the chant seems to mix with the whisper of wind through reeds. You move closer to the chapel, drawn by the rhythm of those voices. Inside, candles flicker along the stone walls, their flames swaying in gentle time with the music. A group of scholars sits at long wooden benches, not to pray, but to study. They are experimenting with sound itself, testing how syllables and tones shape emotion. To them, language is more than speech. It is vibration, an invisible thread that connects body and spirit. From surviving medieval manuscripts, we know that certain phrases, especially in Latin, were believed to hold power when spoken aloud. The combination of vowels and consonants was thought to echo the harmony of the cosmos. This idea reached back to Pythagoras and found new life in the monasteries of Europe, where prayer, song, and spell shared the same cadence. The border between sacred chant and enchantment was thin enough to make even the most cautious monk uneasy. A curious story recorded in a 12th century psalter tells of a monk who accidentally invented a healing prayer while composing music for Vespers. The melody was said to calm the sick, not because of divine miracle, but because the notes matched the human heartbeat. The tune spread quietly through abbeys, disguised as a hymn. When the church later forbade its use in medicine, some called it sorcery, others called it mercy. The distinction depended on who was listening. You sit on a bench as one of the scholars approaches. He carries a small parchment filled with lines of Latin verse and unfamiliar symbols. Language, he explains, is more than meaning. It is movement. His eyes gleam in the candlelight as he speaks. Every word vibrates through the air, shaping what it touches. That is why we read our prayers aloud. The world listens, even when we think it does not. According to marginal notes in medieval grimoires, those who studied incantations believed that the beauty of sound itself could open the soul to higher knowledge. The precise pronunciation of each syllable mattered as much as its content. In some manuscripts, words were written not for reading but for chanting, their letters arranged in spirals or geometric patterns to guide the speaker's breath. It was an art as much as a science, a discipline of rhythm and intention. One anecdote from Paris tells of a scholar who tested the power of Latin sound by whispering a psalm backward while holding a crystal. He claimed the crystal vibrated in response. His colleagues laughed until the crystal cracked in his hand. Whether coincidence or not, the story circulated quickly through the universities. Even skeptics admitted that sound could do strange things to matter, though none could explain why. Modern researchers still wonder whether those medieval experiments were superstition or a primitive form of acoustics. Some suggest that chanting could indeed affect physical and mental states, slowing the pulse and calming the mind. Others dismiss it as coincidence. The monks themselves never cared which answer was true. For them, peace was proof enough. The scholar invites you to join their chant. You hesitate, then repeat the Latin words as he pronounces them. The sound rolls through the chamber, soft and round. You feel it vibrate in your chest, deep and soothing, like the hum of distant bees. The rhythm settles into your breath until the words no longer feel foreign. They become sound without thought, comfort without reason. A curious detail from medieval musical notation shows that early composers sometimes left spaces in their chants where silence was meant to fall like a held breath. Those pauses were not mistakes. They were moments where the divine might answer. The monks in this chapel follow the same idea. Between phrases, the silence grows thick and warm, as if the air itself hums with invisible presence. When the chant ends, the scholar smiles. "Now you understand," he says. Sound is a bridge between worlds. It reminds the body of its own harmony. His words linger, like a final note fading into stillness. You walk outside again. The river glimmers beneath the moon, and the night feels softer, shaped by what you have just heard. The stars shimmer above, as if echoing the pattern of voices below. You realize that for these people, the act of speaking was an act of creation. Every word, every tone, was a small act of magic that reshaped the silence around it. A parchment fragment from a forgotten library contains a line written in elegant Latin: "Speech is breath-given shape." The anonymous writer meant it as philosophy, but you think it could just as easily describe a spell. To breathe is to speak, and to speak is to touch the world. As you follow the river downstream, the chant continues in your memory, weaving itself through the rustle of leaves and the trickle of water. The night smells faintly of wet stone and smoke. You can almost believe that the stars themselves are singing, their music too vast and ancient for the human ear to fully catch. Before you fade into sleep, one last sound reaches you, the soft echo of your own breath joining that endless chorus. It feels like prayer, though you are not sure to whom it is addressed. Perhaps it does not matter. The world listens, as it always has. The river widens as dawn turns the horizon to pale rose. Mist curls above the water, rising like ghostly fingers that dissolve in the light. You follow the flow until it reaches a small wooden bridge. Beyond it stands a stone house surrounded by shelves of herbs drying in the morning sunday. Glass jars line the windowsills, filled with colorful liquids that catch the light like tiny suns. Inside you hear the gentle clatter of spoons, the bubbling of water, and the murmur of quiet voices. This is the workshop of a medieval physician, though much of what he does would look to you like magic. The air smells of rosemary, vinegar, and crushed petals. He moves briskly between tables, his robe tied up at the waist, his hands stained from grinding powders. On one wall hangs a chart of the human body, sketched in black ink and annotated with the names of planets. To him, medicine and astrology are inseparable. Documents from the 14th century show that most medieval doctors relied on astrology to diagnose illness. The belief was simple. The human body reflected the cosmos, and the stars influenced the balance of its humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If Mars dominated a patient's chart, the cause was heat and aggression. If the moon reigned, the body held too much moisture. Physicians checked the heavens before prescribing remedies. Even the timing of bloodletting depended on the position of the moon. The doctor greets you with a tired smile. "You look healthy," he says. "But tell me, how do you sleep?" His question feels oddly familiar. When you hesitate, he nods knowingly. Too much thinking, too little grounding. Saturn sits too heavily on you. He pulls a small wooden box from a shelf and opens it. Inside lie pieces of amber, a feather, and dried mint leaves. "These will ease your dreams," he assures you. You sense that his confidence is as important as his medicine. A letter written by a Parisian student of medicine mentions that every physician kept a personal book of stars. These were handwritten calendars showing the best days for healing, fasting, or even setting broken bones. The charts were often illuminated with small suns and moons drawn in gold ink, their beauty lending credibility to their science. The student admitted that he trusted them more than the words of his professors. A curious story from England describes a surgeon who refused to treat a nobleman's wound until Jupiter rose in the east. When asked why, he said the stars favored growth that day. The patient survived, and the surgeon's reputation grew with him. Historians still wonder whether skill or timing deserves the credit, but the surgeon himself never doubted that the heavens had lent their hand. The physician before you now measures out a powder of ground coral and dried rose petals. For the heart, he says gently. It warms the blood. He mixes it with honey and presses the paste into a small jar. His assistant, a quiet young woman, labels it carefully. On another table, glass flasks simmer over a low flame, distilling lavender oil drop by drop. The rhythmic sound of dripping fills the room, steady as a heartbeat. Surviving recipes from the period often blurred the line between medicine and magic. One remedy for fever combined cinnamon, wine, and a prayer whispered over the cup. Another advised wearing a lodestone on the chest to draw out illness. To modern ears, these methods sound fanciful, but they reflected the medieval conviction that body, mind, and spirit were inseparable. Healing was as much about belief as it was about chemistry. A remarkable note in a Venetian manuscript tells of a healer who treated melancholy by surrounding the patient with blue cloth and the scent of violets. The logic was that color and fragrance could soothe the soul. Centuries later, psychology would rediscover what the healer already knew, that the senses speak directly to the heart. The physician leads you to a patient resting near the window. A boy lies wrapped in linen, pale but breathing easily. He had a fever, the doctor explains. We cooled him with rose water and placed silver coins under his pillow to draw out the heat. He touches the boy's wrist and smiles. He will live. His tone is matter of fact, but you sense the quiet pride beneath it. There is an ongoing debate among modern historians about how effective medieval medicine truly was. Some call it blind superstition, others a foundation for later science. Perhaps both are right. What is clear is that the physicians of this age believed deeply in harmony, the idea that healing meant restoring balance, whether in the body, the stars, or the soul. That belief alone must have eased countless hearts. The doctor wipes his hands and gestures toward a shelf of instruments. Bronze scalpels, glass syringes, tiny hammers for testing reflexes. Each tool is beautiful in its craftsmanship, almost ceremonial. These are my relics, he says with a faint grin. But the best cure is always time. He opens a window, letting in a rush of cool air that carries the scent of damp earth and crushed herbs. A curious account from a monastery infirmary mentions a physician who read psalms aloud during surgery, timing his incisions to the rhythm of the verses. He believed that steady prayer kept his hand from trembling. The record notes that his patients rarely died, though the monks attributed it to divine grace. You wonder if rhythm itself was the secret, a kind of quiet focus disguised as devotion. The boy stirs and murmurs something in his sleep. The physician adjusts the blanket and hums softly, the tune familiar and soothing. For a moment, the air feels still, touched by something beyond skill or reason. Perhaps that is what all healers seek, the point where knowledge meets compassion and turns into magic. When you leave, the sun is climbing higher, its light spilling across the shelves of bottles. The colors gleam like jewels, transforming the room into a cathedral of glass. You glance back once more. The doctor is already bent over his notes, sketching a diagram of constellations above a drawing of a human heart. He looks peaceful, as though he has found his place between heaven and earth. The road outside smells of mint and wood smoke. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls the hour. You walk on, your mind calm, your breathing steady, as though the doctor's quiet faith in balance has seeped into your own heart. The road climbs again into the hills, where the wind whispers through tall grass and the scent of wild thyme drifts in slow waves. The sky darkens with evening, and somewhere ahead, the faint glow of a lantern flickers near a crumbling stone archway. You follow it, drawn toward the rhythm of soft scratching sounds, someone writing by candlelight. Inside the small ruin, a scholar sits at a wooden table covered with parchment and compasses. His ink-stained fingers move carefully across a circle he has drawn in black, its edges filled with mysterious shapes and letters. He looks up and smiles as if expecting you. Every secret has a geometry, he says quietly. The trick is learning to read it. His eyes gleam in the lamplight, filled with a mixture of fatigue and wonder. Behind him, the walls are covered in sketches of stars, animals, and cryptic sigils. The air hums faintly with wax and ink, and the scent of cedar smoke coils like a living thing. From fragments found in illuminated manuscripts, we know that medieval scholars often hid messages within their texts using symbols, diagrams, or coded alphabets. Some of these codes were practical, protecting recipes and trade secrets. Others were spiritual, intended to veil divine insights from unworthy eyes. The practice of hiding knowledge was not born of fear alone, but also of reverence. To reveal everything, they believed, was to invite chaos. The scholar before you dips his quill into the ink and gestures toward the circle. This is a memory palace, he explains. Each mark reminds me of an idea too dangerous to write plainly. He points to a spiral drawn near the center. That stands for fire, or transformation, or perhaps both. His tone is casual, but his movements are deliberate. Every line seems to balance precision and intuition. A curious story recorded in an Italian codex tells of a monk who hid forbidden experiments inside the margins of a Bible. Each decorated initial contained an alchemical symbol only other scholars could recognize. Centuries later, when the pages were restored, historians found recipes for tinctures and elixirs woven between verses of scripture. The monk had turned holy text into a secret laboratory. The scholar traces another pattern on his parchment, a triangle surrounded by faint Latin words. This is not magic, he says softly. It is the grammar of the invisible. His phrasing lingers in the air like incense. You realize he is describing a kind of meditation, a visual language for thoughts too complex to express in words. To him, geometry is prayer written in curves. Some specialists who study medieval symbolism believe that these circles and sigils were early forms of scientific notation, abstract representations of forces and relationships. Others argue they were mystical diagrams designed to focus the mind. Both views may be right. What matters is that such symbols allowed thinkers to imagine beyond language, to hold the universe in shapes instead of sentences. A particularly striking example survives in the work of John Dee, an English mathematician and advisor to Queen Elizabeth centuries later. His notebooks contain intricate star maps and coded alphabets he called angelic. Some believe he was simply exploring mathematical harmonies, while others insist he was reaching for a language that bridged heaven and reason. Even now, no one fully agrees. The scholar before you smiles faintly, as if reading your thoughts. Knowledge needs protection, he says. Once, the world burned libraries for asking too many questions. He reaches for a small box and opens it. Inside lie several tokens, a silver coin engraved with runes, a dried violet pressed between glass, and a feather stained with gold. Each of these, he says, marks a truth I cannot yet speak. His voice is tender, almost sorrowful. Some ideas are not ready to be heard. A fragment from a medieval correspondence between scholars suggests that many used personal ciphers not only for safety but for play. Hidden riddles were left in manuscripts like trails for future readers. One marginal note reads, "He who deciphers me shall share my laughter." You imagine those quiet exchanges, scholars across generations winking at each other through codes no outsider could see. The candle flickers, and shadows twist across the walls, making the symbols seem to move. The scholar leans back, gazing at them as if seeing constellations in reverse. When we look at the stars, he says, we seek patterns that prove we belong to the same design. Writing is no different. His voice grows soft, almost drowsy. We draw lines because we are afraid of being lost. An unusual note from the archives of Prague describes a teacher who instructed students to copy texts while adding one mistake on purpose. The error served as a sign of humility, a reminder that perfection belonged only to the divine. Looking around this small room filled with unfinished circles, you see that principle alive. Every mark is deliberate, yet none feels complete. The scholar's diagrams breathe like living things, always in motion, never fully satisfied. He offers you a sheet of parchment filled with unfamiliar markings. Try it, he says. Draw a symbol for something you wish to remember. You hesitate, then sketch a small spiral of your own. It feels awkward at first, but then strangely calming. The ink glistens under the candlelight. Good, he murmurs. Now it will live. Outside, night settles deep. The wind sighs through the broken archway, carrying the faint scent of smoke and rain. The scholar begins packing his tools, stacking papers with careful precision. Before he blows out the candle, he turns to you. If you ever forget, he says, look for patterns. They are the universe's handwriting. You step outside as the last flame fades. The sky is clear and full of stars. For a moment, they seem to arrange themselves into the same circle you saw on his parchment. You blink, and the pattern is gone, but the feeling remains a quiet certainty that meaning hides in everything, waiting for patient eyes. The grass sways around you, whispering softly as you walk away. Each blade catches the starlight for an instant, like letters in a message written across the earth. Somewhere behind you, the scholar's hidden symbols glow faintly in the dark, keeping their secrets safe for another curious traveler yet to come. The night air carries the scent of lavender and smoke as you descend toward a quiet village. The roofs gleam with dew beneath the moonlight, and a few stray lanterns flicker in the windows. In the square, the stone well glows faintly under the stars. Near it, a woman in a faded green shawl gathers herbs into a wicker basket. Her hands move quickly, her gestures confident. She hums softly to herself, a tune too old to name. When she looks up and sees you, she smiles with a kind of knowing that feels both gentle and unsettling. She invites you closer, motioning toward her small cottage at the edge of the square. Its walls are covered with drying plants, and the door hangs open, letting out the warm scent of rosemary and beeswax. Inside, every surface is alive with purpose. Candles, vials, a mortar filled with crushed petals, a bundle of twigs tied neatly with red string. You look tired, she says. Sit down. The night listens better when we are still. Records from rural England and France describe such women as cunning folk, healers and midwives who worked on the fringes of both medicine and mystery. They knew the language of plants, the moods of weather, and the ways of birth and death. In villages where doctors were rare and priests too far away, these women filled the space between body and spirit. To many they were a blessing, to others, a danger that the church never quite knew how to name. The woman takes a small clay cup and fills it with steaming liquid. The smell is earthy, tinged with mint and something sharper. For clarity, she says, and for courage. You drink, and the warmth settles into your chest. She nods, pleased. It's always better to meet the night halfway. A curious account from a 15th century trial mentions a woman accused of using moonlight water to heal fevers. She had left a bowl outside under the full moon, believing its light could cleanse impurities. When her patient recovered, the neighbors whispered that she had bargained with the sky. The records never say whether she was punished or spared, only that the fever never returned. The woman before you lights a small bundle of herbs in the fire. Smoke rises, soft and fragrant. She fans it gently with her hand. Everything has its own breath, she explains. You just have to listen to how it speaks. Her eyes gleam with calm conviction. You watch as she tosses dried sage into the flames, then sprinkles salt around the hearth. The ritual feels both practical and sacred, a conversation with the unseen world. Historians who study these traditions still debate their origins. Some trace them back to pre-Christian fertility rites. Others see them as remnants of early herbal medicine disguised in superstition. It is possible that both are true. Knowledge often survives by changing its clothes, slipping quietly through generations. Whatever its source, the wisdom of these women endured because it worked, or at least because it gave comfort when nothing else could. The woman takes down a small wooden box from a shelf. Inside are charms of every shape: feathers, shells, bits of bone, scraps of cloth tied with string. She lifts one, a small pouch filled with salt and lavender. This one is for peace in the home, she says. Another holds a sprig of rowan and a piece of iron. This drives away envy. Each charm is a blend of prayer and craftsmanship, its meaning as much emotional as spiritual. A story from northern Scotland tells of a midwife who whispered blessings over every child she delivered, tracing a circle of milk on the doorstep before leaving. Villagers said no child she touched ever fell ill in infancy. Years later, her name was still spoken with gratitude, though no one could agree whether she was saintly or suspicious. Her descendants kept her recipes but never her explanations. The woman in front of you begins to prepare another mixture. She crushes juniper berries with salt, adds a few drops of oil, and stirs it with a wooden spoon. For protection, she murmurs. You keep it by the door so guests leave their troubles outside. Her movements are slow, deliberate, almost meditative. Watching her, you realize that this is not the frantic magic of fear, but the steady ritual of someone who understands the rhythm of life itself. According to early modern court transcripts, many of these women defended themselves by claiming their spells were simply prayers in disguise. They often quoted scripture while mixing potions, adding a layer of protection through faith. Yet even that could not always save them. The very knowledge that made them indispensable also made them vulnerable. Wisdom, in that world, was dangerous when it wore a woman's face. A peculiar note from a rural parish mentions that one healer taught her apprentices to test remedies by offering them first to the wind. If the breeze shifted direction, the medicine was pure. If not, it was abandoned. No one ever explained how or why this worked, but the practice survived for generations. Perhaps the wind, like all unseen forces, enjoys being consulted. The woman notices your gaze lingering on the herbs hanging above the fire. Every leaf has a memory, she says. They remember the sun that raised them. She reaches for a bundle of dried yarrow, ties a few sprigs together, and presses them into your hands. Carry this when you travel. It keeps you from losing your way. The stems are rough but fragrant, smelling faintly of rain and earth. Outside, the night deepens. The sky is heavy with stars, and the sound of crickets hums through the dark. You thank her and step into the cool air. Behind you, the cottage glows softly, a small island of warmth in the endless black. The woman's silhouette moves briefly past the window, then disappears. As you walk away, you think of all the nameless healers who kept their villages alive. One remedy, one prayer, one whispered charm at a time. History remembers kings and battles, but it forgets these women who worked quietly in smoke and shadow. Yet their legacy lingers in every cup of tea brewed for comfort, in every mother's instinct to touch a child's forehead and listen for something beyond words. The wind brushes your cheek, and you imagine it carries her blessing still. The stars seem closer now, as if they too are watching over the road ahead. You clutch the yarrow bundle gently and smile, feeling safer than reason alone can explain. The air grows colder as you walk farther from the village. The path winds through low fields and ends at the edge of a walled town. Bells toll in the distance, solemn and insistent. You sense a different kind of tension here, not the quiet mystery of wise women and healers, but the stern weight of authority. Smoke rises from chimneys, and people hurry along the streets with their heads bowed. Somewhere behind the closed doors of churches and courts, decisions are being made about what should be known and what must be silenced. You pause near the gate of a monastery where a group of men in heavy robes gathers around a torch. One holds a scroll while another reads aloud in Latin, his voice echoing against the stone. The words are official and cold, condemning dangerous writings that spread confusion among the faithful. When he finishes, the men feed the scroll to the fire. The parchment curls and blackens, and the flame flares high before settling into ash. The smell is sharp and bitter, like burned honey. Historical accounts from the 12th to the 15th centuries describe repeated efforts by church leaders to control what they considered forbidden knowledge. Astrology, alchemy, and certain forms of natural philosophy were tolerated only when framed as divine study. Anything that hinted at independence from faith risked being branded heresy. In this age, the mind was a battlefield, and even curiosity could be a sin. You walk through the market square, where talk hushes at the sight of a priest's robe. The townspeople trade nervous glances. One whispers that a healer has been arrested for mixing charms with prayers. Another says a student's books were taken for containing diagrams of stars. Fear spreads quickly here, carried in rumor and silence alike. An entry from the Inquisition's records mentions a man accused of possessing a mirror that could summon false visions. He insisted it was simply polished metal used for studying optics, but his protests changed nothing. His mirror was shattered, and his reputation with it. The irony, of course, is that such mirrors would later help scientists understand light itself. For now, the boundary between invention and blasphemy remains invisible and shifting. You find shelter inside a small chapel where candles flicker against carved stone. A young monk kneels before the altar, his head bowed. After a long silence, he speaks without turning. "They are burning books again," he says softly. "Sometimes I wonder which burns faster, the parchment or the truth." His voice trembles with quiet frustration. He looks back, eyes filled with exhaustion rather than rebellion. "I used to copy words of wisdom. Now I erase them." A letter preserved from an anonymous monk in France reveals the same pain. "We are told to destroy what we do not understand," he wrote. "Yet the more we burn, the more darkness fills the room." The letter ends abruptly, as if the writer feared being found. Scholars still debate whether it was ever sent. The monk beside you rises and walks to a hidden alcove behind the altar. He removes a loose brick and pulls out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside lies a single book, its leather cover worn smooth by handling. "This," he whispers, "is a text of the heavens. I could not bear to destroy it." He places it gently in your hands. The pages are filled with delicate drawings of stars and planetary paths. Margins glimmer faintly with golden ink. The beauty of it feels like quiet defiance. A peculiar story from Florence tells of a bishop who secretly studied astronomy despite publicly denouncing it. He kept his instruments hidden in a wine cellar, claiming they were tools of penance. When he died, his servants found his notes written inside the covers of hymnals. It seems even those charged with enforcing purity could not always resist the pull of wonder. You sit beside the monk and turn a few pages. The diagrams are precise yet poetic. "The Creator speaks in circles," he says. "We fear them because they have no beginning and no end." His words echo softly in the cold air. He smiles faintly, though it looks more like sorrow. The Church fears knowledge that does not need permission. Scholars who study the Inquisition's documents remain divided on whether suppression truly extinguished medieval science or merely forced it into disguise. Some argue that censorship slowed progress for centuries. Others claim it sharpened the minds of thinkers who learned to speak in code. In either case, truth survived by whispering instead of shouting. The monk places the book back behind the brick. "If they find this," he murmurs, "they will call it the work of demons." but I believe God hides in the patterns they fear. He turns toward the altar and lights a candle. Perhaps light and fire are not so different. Both reveal, both destroy. The flame reflects in his eyes, steady and resigned. A small chronicle from Prague describes a group of scholars who met secretly in a wine cellar to discuss the forbidden books of Aristotle. They disguised their meetings as choir practice, singing coded hymns that matched the rhythm of philosophical arguments. Their courage was quiet, but enduring. Many of the ideas they protected would later resurface during the Renaissance, long after the names of their persecutors were forgotten. Outside the chapel, the bells ring again. The town prepares for another sermon against superstition. Smoke still rises from the square, curling into the sky like a second prayer. You step into the street and feel the cold wind rush past your face. For a moment, it smells faintly of ash and parchment. The stars above flicker faintly through the haze. You think of the monk hiding his book, of the bishop studying in secret, of every quiet mind that refused to stop asking questions. Knowledge, it seems, has always worn a disguise, waiting patiently for the day it can step into the light again. The bells fall silent. The night stretches still and wide. You walk on, the faint glow of the chapel behind you. The wind hums softly against your ears, carrying with it a question too delicate for words. How many truths, you wonder, are still waiting behind walls of fear, burning quietly, unseen yet alive? The night softens as you leave the walled town behind. The wind feels gentle again, scented with pine and damp soil. You follow a narrow path that leads into the forest. The moon filters through the branches, scattering silver light across the ground. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls, and the sound seems to echo for a long time. You walk quietly, feeling the stillness press around you like a dream. Then, faintly at first, you hear singing. A single voice, thin and sweet, rises and falls among the trees. You move closer and find a clearing lit by small candles placed in a circle. At its center sits a woman in a dark cloak, eyes closed, her lips moving with the rhythm of prayer. Around her, symbols are drawn in ash, and a bowl of water reflects the moonlight. When she opens her eyes, she smiles. "Do not fear," she says softly. The forest listens. Her face is lined with years, yet her expression carries serenity. You notice a rosary around her wrist. Though her words sound older than any scripture, she motions for you to sit beside her. "Dreams are windows," she whispers. "Sometimes they open, sometimes they call." The air around her feels charged, not frightening, but thick with possibility, like the moment before rain. Accounts from the Middle Ages describe people who claim to see visions in dreams or hear voices of saints and angels. These experiences were often celebrated when they confirmed doctrine, but feared when they did not. Some dreamers were called prophets, others witches. The difference usually depended on who was listening. The woman pours a few drops of oil into the bowl, watching the ripples. "A dream is a conversation," she says. "The spirit speaks in symbols because plain words would break us." Her tone is calm, almost instructive, as if she has said this 1,000 times. The reflection in the water shifts, showing the moon's face trembling on the surface. You realize she is waiting for you to see something too. One curious record from a monastery in Saxony tells of a nun who dreamed of a flaming wheel spinning in the sky. Her vision was copied by her abbess and circulated among scholars. Some called it divine revelation. Others called it fever. Centuries later, historians would identify her as Hildegard of Bingen, a visionary whose writings merged theology, science, and art into something the age could barely comprehend. She saw the cosmos as one living organism, and her dreams became maps of creation. The woman beside you hums softly, eyes half closed. "Sometimes spirits come as colors," she murmurs. "Blue means truth, green means healing, red warns of danger." Her fingers trace slow circles in the air. "But beware of white without warmth. That is emptiness pretending to be light." Her wisdom sounds poetic, yet carries an edge of warning. You wonder how many nights she has spent here listening to the forest breathe. Scholars of medieval mysticism still discuss whether such experiences were psychological, divine, or something in between. To the people of that time, the soul was not confined to the body. It could wander in sleep, meeting angels, ancestors, or fragments of its own longing. Dream interpretation was both science and art, taught through symbols and tested by experience. A record from a healer's notebook found in southern France describes using dream rituals for guidance in illness. Patients were given herbs that induced calm sleep, then asked to recount their dreams upon waking. The healer would translate the images, snakes, rivers, birds, into treatments. If someone dreamed of drowning, it meant too much moisture in the body. If they dreamed of fire, fever was near. The language of the unconscious became a diagnostic tool long before psychology existed. The woman leans forward and dips her fingers into the water. She flicks a few drops toward the candles, which hiss softly. Every dream burns a little, she says. That is how it teaches. She looks up at you, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. Tell me, what do you dream of most? You hesitate, unsure how to answer. She smiles again. Then listen closer. The soul repeats what the mind forgets. A strange chronicle from Norway recounts how a shepherd once dreamed of his village sinking beneath waves. He warned everyone, but they laughed. A week later, a flood destroyed half the valley. The story became a sermon about faith, but villagers remembered it as proof that dreams speak truth to those who dare to hear. The forest grows quieter. Even the wind seems to pause. The woman closes her eyes and begins to chant, a language you cannot recognize. The rhythm rises and falls like waves. The sound makes your heart slow. You find yourself breathing with her, your pulse sinking to the steady beat of her words. It feels like stepping into a current that has flowed for centuries. Historians have found descriptions of such chants written in the margins of manuscripts, often dismissed as nonsense syllables. Yet those sounds carried intention. They were meant to lull the body, to open the mind, to guide the dream. Perhaps they were ancient forms of hypnosis, or simply songs that taught stillness. Whatever their nature, they created a bridge between waking and wonder. The woman stops and opens her eyes. It is enough, she says softly. The night will speak when it is ready. She gathers her candles one by one, pressing each into the earth to extinguish it. When only the moonlight remains, she hands you a small stone from the bowl. Keep this. It remembers what it has seen. The stone is smooth and cool, glimmering faintly with moisture. You stand, and she nods in farewell. Dream kindly, she says, her voice already fading into the dark. As you leave the clearing, the forest feels alive with quiet voices, the whispers of leaves and wind weaving together into something almost intelligible. By the time you reach the edge of the woods, dawn is brushing the sky with grey light. The stone in your hand feels warm now, as if it carries the echo of the woman's chant. You close your fist around it and listen to your own heartbeat. For the first time in a long while, it feels perfectly in tune with the world. The forest thins as you step into a meadow drenched in sunlight. Dew glitters on the tall grass, and a soft breeze carries the smell of fresh earth and blooming heather. The world feels newly washed, its silence broken only by the chirping of distant birds. Ahead, a small workshop leans against the slope of a hill. The roof sags a little, and smoke curls gently from the chimney. Through the open door, you glimpse shelves of tools and strange objects that glint like captured fragments of light. Inside, a man in a patched cloak is polishing a smooth stone with deliberate care. He looks up and grins, his beard flecked with dust. "You look like you've walked far," he says, gesturing toward a stool. "Sit, and let your eyes adjust. Most people see too quickly. The scent of oil and iron fills the air. You sit, watching as he lifts a long wooden staff from the table. Its tip holds a crystal that catches the sunlight and scatters it across the walls in coloured shards. The effect is almost musical. Historical records from inventories of noble households reveal that such tools were once common among those who practiced what they called natural philosophy. Scrying mirrors, brass compasses, astrolabes, and polished stones were used for study, ritual, and performance alike. Some were instruments of early science. Others were believed to channel divine influence. To the medieval mind, an object could hold both meanings at once without contradiction. The craftsman hands you a small lens mounted in brass. "Look through this," he says. You raise it to your eye and gasp. The world sharpens, every blade of grass outlined in perfect detail. "Clear sight," he says proudly. "A simple trick of glass and patience." You realize he is describing a primitive magnifying lens, an ancestor of what will one day reveal invisible worlds. A note from a 13th century merchant in Venice mentions the trade of seeing stones, convex discs used by scholars and magicians alike. Some called them tools of learning, others windows into hidden realms. Their dual reputation persisted for centuries. The craftsman smiles as if aware of this contradiction. "People fear what helps them see," he says, "especially when it shows more than they expect." He moves to a shelf and lifts a round mirror made of obsidian, its surface dark as a night without stars. "This one," he says, "reflects what has not yet happened." His tone carries amusement rather than deception. He holds it toward the light, and for a moment, your reflection wavers, replaced by a swirl of smoke and faint color. Then it clears again. "It's only glass," he says gently, "but sometimes belief does the rest." A curious story from a noble court in Burgundy tells of a mirror said to show visions of distant places. Its owner claimed to see her husband's army marching hundreds of miles away. Modern historians think it might have been an early experiment with polished metal and light projection, but for those who watched, it was magic. The mirror disappeared after her death, leaving only rumor behind. The craftsman shows you another object, a small bowl carved from crystal, its edges etched with delicate patterns. "For scrying," he explains. "You fill it with water and let the reflection speak." He gestures for you to try. The surface trembles slightly, then smooths. For a fleeting second, you think you see shapes moving inside stars perhaps, or clouds, or maybe nothing at all. The mind projects what it needs, he says, smiling. That's why such tools work. They help you listen to yourself. Some scholars who study medieval manuscripts argue that magical instruments like these were never meant as deceptions but as meditations. The act of gazing into a mirror or crystal allowed the thinker to focus the imagination, much like modern contemplation. Others believe that certain tools were used to impress patrons, blending showmanship with scholarship. The truth likely shifts somewhere between the two. He turns toward a long table cluttered with instruments. There are compasses for drawing circles, delicate balances for weighing powders, and small glass spheres filled with colored liquid. "Every craftsman has a language," he says. "Mine is precision. The rest is faith." You notice a piece of parchment beneath the tools, covered in drawings of geometric figures and written prayers. Each line is drawn with near religious care. A particularly intriguing entry in a 15th century ledger describes how the possession of certain objects could determine a scholar's reputation. Owning an astrolabe signified learning. Keeping a crystal sphere marked one as suspect. The boundary between respected knowledge and condemned curiosity was thin, depending on who was watching. The craftsman shrugs, as if sensing your thoughts. "If I call it study, they praise me. If I call it magic, they burn me. I let them choose." He hands you a pendant shaped like a small key, its surface engraved with a star and a circle. "This," he says, "represents balance. Metal for the body, light for the mind." He places it in your palm, and the warmth of his hand lingers. When you hold it, remember that every tool is only as good as the hand that wields it. Outside, the afternoon sun slants through the open doorway, illuminating the room in a wash of gold. Dust motes drift through the air like tiny sparks. The craftsman lowers his head over his work again, humming softly. The sound of grinding stone mixes with the distant rustle of leaves. You realize he may never call himself a wizard, yet his tools, his patience, and his way of seeing the world all carry the same quiet power. One document from a London guild mentions that some artisans were known to inscribe blessings into their creations before selling them, whispering short verses or breathing over the metal to seal its harmony. Perhaps this craftsman does the same, not as superstition but as habit. You watch him polish a small glass sphere until it catches the sun and glows like a miniature dawn. You thank him and stand. He nods, still smiling, eyes focused on his work. Remember, he says, there is no difference between wonder and understanding, only depth. As you step outside, the meadow hums with insects and birdsong. You glance back once to see him silhouetted in the golden light, his hands steady over the glimmering tools. The sound of his file fades behind you, blending with the whisper of the grass. You carry the key in your pocket, its weight a small reminder that even simple instruments can open doors the mind has forgotten exist. The sun dips lower, washing the sky in shades of amber and soft rose. You follow a narrow path down into a valley where smoke curls lazily from chimneys and the faint hum of voices drifts across the fields. The smell of metal and ash reaches you before you see the building. It stands at the edge of the river, half workshop and half home, its windows glowing with the deep orange light of a furnace. Inside, someone is working late. You step through the open doorway and are met by a wave of heat. The air smells of burning charcoal, vinegar, and iron. Glass jars clutter the shelves, their contents swirling in strange colors: red, green, and deep indigo. At a long table near the fire, a young man bends over a glass vessel filled with liquid that shimmers faintly like melted silver. His hair is singed at the edges, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He glances up and grins, as if happy to have company. "Careful," he says cheerfully. "Some of these experiments prefer silence." You take a cautious step closer. He is clearly an apprentice, young but focused, his hands moving with the rhythm of someone who has repeated these motions many times. Around him, the workshop looks both chaotic and sacred tools scattered, papers weighted with stones, a cracked crucible glowing faintly in the fire. Records from late medieval guilds describe such apprenticeships in detail. Alchemists rarely worked alone. They trained younger students to manage heat, grind minerals, and watch for subtle changes in color. The work was as much discipline as discovery, requiring patience that could test even the calmest spirit. A single experiment might take weeks, and one mistake could undo months of labor. The apprentice lifts a thin rod of glass and swirls it gently in the liquid. "I'm not after gold," he explains. "I'm after understanding." His eyes gleam with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "But if it turns to gold by accident, I won't complain." His tone carries a touch of humor, but you can sense the sincerity beneath it. Every experiment here is a prayer to the logic of transformation. From a dusty shelf, he pulls down an old notebook. Its pages are filled with drawings of furnaces, diagrams of celestial movements, and long notes written in uneven Latin. "My master says there is no real difference between a metal changing color and a soul learning patience," he says quietly. "Both require heat." He looks toward the furnace, where the flame burns white at the center, and both can fail. A surviving letter from a German alchemist to his student expresses the same lesson. You must learn to wait for the fire to teach you. Impatience is the only impurity. The letter ends with the phrase, "Even failure refines." You imagine how many sleepless nights such advice has soothed through the centuries. The apprentice adjusts a copper pipe leading into the furnace. Steam hisses, and he leans close, watching droplets form on the glass. "This one is meant to purify mercury," he says. "If I do it right, it should become clearer than water." He chuckles softly. "If I do it wrong, it will explode. Either way, I will learn something." The smell of heated metal thickens the air. You can feel the pulse of the fire through the soles of your feet. A curious record from the archives of Prague tells of apprentices who accidentally discovered new alloys while trying to make the philosopher's stone. One mixture produced metal so resistant to corrosion that smiths used it for church bells. They never called it gold, but they called it sacred. Perhaps the line between magic and invention is simply the name one gives to persistence. The apprentice wipes sweat from his brow and peers into a glass flask that glows faintly green. "See that?" he says. "It's changing." The liquid thickens slowly, swirling into new shades. He smiles as though witnessing a miracle. "Color tells the story," he explains. "Every hue is a word in the language of transformation." He looks almost reverent, and you realize this is what devotion looks like when it wears no robe and recites no prayer. Some historians of science argue that the careful attention of medieval alchemists to process, observation, and measurement laid the groundwork for modern chemistry. Their methods may have been wrapped in mystery, but their curiosity was genuine. Others claim they were dreamers chasing illusions. Perhaps they were both scientists guided by faith, poets guided by precision. The apprentice suddenly laughs, a warm, tired sound. "I've burned more shoes than I've made discoveries," he says, showing you the singed hem of his robe. "But even the burns teach me something." He stirs the mixture again and lowers the flame slightly. "My master says the secret of alchemy is simple: patience and error, repeated until enlightenment accidentally happens." A fragment of a student's diary from Florence describes a similar scene. The master spoke little, it reads, but his eyes shone when the metal glowed. "I thought I saw faith itself in that light." You understand now that this craft is as much meditation as experiment. The rhythm of the furnace replaces the rhythm of prayer. The apprentice opens a small window to let the smoke escape. Cool night air rushes in, carrying the scent of the river. "The water keeps me sane," he says. "When the fire talks too much, I listen to the river instead." His words make you smile. There is wisdom hidden inside his exhaustion, the kind that only long nights and near failures can teach. The liquid in the flask finally clears, pale as moonlight. He sighs, relieved. "Not gold," he says, "but cleaner than before. That will do." He pours the substance carefully into a smaller vessel, sealing it with wax. "Every success is a new question," he adds quietly. Outside, frogs croak along the riverbank, and the sound blends with the low hiss of cooling metal. The apprentice tidies his tools, stacking flasks and wiping the table with a cloth already stained beyond rescue. His face glows in the dim firelight, weary but content. "Tomorrow," he says, "I'll try again. The world never runs out of mysteries." As you leave, you glance back at the open door. The workshop flickers with soft orange light, and for a moment it looks like a small sun burning quietly in the darkness. The sound of his quill scratching on parchment follows you out, steady and sure, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. The river winds through the valley, its surface glimmering with the pale light of dawn. The air is cool and wet, carrying the scent of moss and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. You follow the path until it narrows beside a stone bridge, where a traveller's cart stands half unloaded. The driver, an older man with a weathered face and bright eyes, waves you closer. His cart is piled with cages, jars, and bundles wrapped in burlap. You notice movement among them, feathers, scales, and fur. "You look curious," he says, smiling. "Good. Curiosity feeds the spirit." He lifts the edge of a cloth to reveal a row of small glass vials, each holding something different. One contains what looks like powdered pearl, another, a curl of snakeskin, a third, a tuft of fur sealed with wax. "Ingredients," he says, lowering his voice. "Not for spells, mind you, but for understanding." The word understanding carries a tone of affection, as though it were the name of an old friend. Written records from medieval bestiaries show that natural philosophers and healers often relied on animals for their remedies. Some ingredients had genuine medical effects: honey for wounds, leeches for drawing blood, while others were rooted in symbolism rather than science. To a mind shaped by myth, every creature carried meaning. Lions stood for courage, owls for wisdom, serpents for transformation. The body of nature was a living library waiting to be read. The traveler reaches into a cage and lifts a small, calm owl. For sight, he says softly, stroking its feathers. Not for the eyes, but for what lies behind them. He lets it go, and it flies into the mist. People forget that animals were our first teachers. They showed us how to live, how to die, and how to heal. He opens another bundle, revealing dried fish scales pressed into a parchment pouch. Ground with mint and vinegar, this stops bleeding, he explains. Or so the old masters said. He grins. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes the patient simply recovered from stubbornness. You laugh, and he joins you, his eyes bright with humor. A remarkable entry in a 13th century medical compendium lists ingredients that now sound fantastical: powdered emerald, wolf's liver, eagle fat, and unicorn horn. The last, of course, was usually narwhal tusk traded from the north at a high price. People believed its shavings could neutralize poison. Kings drank from cups lined with it, convinced it protected them from treachery. Whether or not it worked, the belief gave them courage, which often mattered more. The traveler picks up a long feather, black at the tip and white at the base. Crow, he says, feared by priests, loved by magicians, carries messages between worlds. He spins it lightly in his fingers, then tucks it behind your ear. Every symbol hides a truth, he says, even if that truth changes shape. A curious account from a scholar in Paris tells of an alchemist who kept snakes in his laboratory, claiming they taught him patience. When asked how, he replied, "They shed what no longer fits." The story became a moral lesson in transformation, retold in sermons and poems. To the medieval imagination, every creature was a mirror of the human condition. The traveler begins preparing something on a small wooden board. He crushes dried herbs with what looks like powdered bone, adds a few drops of water, and stirs with a twig. A charm for protection, he says with a wink, made from nettle, sage, and the dust of a hornet's nest. Not as frightening as it sounds. The mixture thickens into a paste that smells of earth and spice. He spreads a little onto a strip of linen and ties it around your wrist. Now you carry the wild with you, he says, satisfied. Researchers who study folklore often describe these practices as the meeting point between observation and imagination. People learned from the natural world but filled its gaps with story. To kill a snake, they said, was to invite drought. To see a hare at dusk meant a change of fortune. Nature spoke through signs, and humans answered with ritual. Both sides of the conversation were equally sincere. The traveler shows you a jar filled with amber-colored liquid. Inside floats what looks like a tiny curled creature. A salamander, he explains. Found it near a forge. He lowers his voice as though sharing a secret. They say it lives in fire and cannot burn. I keep it to remind me that endurance is its own kind of magic. The salamander's outline glows faintly in the light, though you suspect it is only the reflection of the flame. Still, you understand the feeling behind his words. A fascinating legend from northern Italy claims that salamanders were born from lightning strikes. Builders once sealed small bones into the walls of houses to protect them from storms. The belief lasted for centuries, long after anyone had seen the creature itself. In that way, myth served as architecture, reinforcing both walls and faith. The traveler begins to pack up his cart. Everything I carry, he says, is part of a story. Some true, some almost true, and some truer than truth. He pats one of the burlap bundles and laughs. You never know which until you listen long enough. You watch as he secures the last cage and tightens the ropes. The sky is brightening now, the mist lifting to reveal the soft greens of the fields. Take this, he says, handing you a small vial filled with golden powder, crushed pollen and a drop of honey. Sprinkle it in your path when you forget where you're going. The bees will remember for you. His tone is playful, yet somehow sincere enough that you nod in gratitude. As the cart creaks away down the road, you hold the vial up to the sunlight. The powder catches the light like ground sunshine, glowing faintly. You slip it into your pocket and begin to walk. The river murmurs beside you, the air alive with bird calls and the rustle of wings. You think about how much of human knowledge was learned not from books, but from watching, touching, imitating, and imagining. The road ahead curves between meadows, where animals graze lazily under the morning sunday. You breathe deeply, feeling the warmth on your face. Somewhere far behind you, the traveler whistles a tune that sounds like laughter turned into melody. For a moment, you imagine that every feather, every petal, every spark of light carries a message from the past. Still teaching, still alive. By midday, the path widens into a bustling road that hums with voices. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifts through the air, mingled with the metallic clink of coins and the sound of wooden wheels. You find yourself at the edge of a market square alive with movement. Children chase one another through the crowd, while merchants shout about silk, salt, and spices. But it is not the traders who hold everyone's attention. Near the fountain, a man in a bright red cloak is performing. His sleeves sparkle with small metal discs that catch the sun as he moves. In one hand he holds a lute, in the other, a bundle of playing cards. His audience is wide-eyed. Farmers, noblewomen, soldiers each leaning forward, half smiling, half suspicious. You step closer as he flips the cards through the air with astonishing speed. When they land, the top one bursts into a puff of coloured smoke, revealing a silver coin beneath. The crowd gasps. "Magic," someone whispers, though the performer's grin suggests otherwise. "Not magic," he says cheerfully, bowing low. "Just clever fingers and patient practice." He winks at you as if sharing a secret. But isn't that what all wizards say? Historical records describe such entertainers as jongleurs or conjurers, travelling from town to trade laughter for coins. Many knew sleight of hand, juggling, or illusion. Some even performed mock alchemy, pretending to turn pebbles into gold dust to amuse their audiences. They were the bridge between scholarship and spectacle, bringing fragments of learned mystery to people who could not read. The man holds up a silver ring, spinning it between his fingers. "This ring," he announces, "belongs to whoever believes hardest." A boy steps forward eagerly. The conjurer hands him the ring, then whispers something. The boy nods and closes his fist. When he opens it again, the ring is gone, and the crowd erupts in applause. You notice the conjurer slip it quietly into his sleeve with a skill so smooth it feels like sorcery. From surviving guild charters in London and Florence, we know that such street magicians were often licensed performers, allowed to entertain so long as they avoided claiming divine power. Their tricks had to remain earthly. To call upon spirits or prophecy invited trouble. Yet audiences rarely cared where the illusion came from, so long as it sparkled long enough to make them forget the day's worries. A curious anecdote from a traveller's diary tells of a performer who used mirrors and polished metal to project ghostly images during night fairs. Some said it was witchcraft, others insisted it was art. The line between the two was as thin as smoke. The man before you now begins a new act. He lays a cloth on the ground, places 3 wooden cups on top, and hides a small red pebble beneath one. His hands move swiftly, the cups sliding and spinning like dancers. "Keep your eyes sharp," he says, laughing. The stone likes to wander. The crowd leans forward, following the motion. You think you know where it is, but when he lifts the cups, the pebble is gone entirely. He opens his mouth and pretends to cough it out onto his palm. The laughter that follows is bright and free. An entry in a 14th century French account book mentions that wandering magicians sometimes carried secret compartments in their cups, using springs and false bottoms. The ingenuity of these tools impressed even scholars, some of whom later adapted the mechanics for scientific experiments. The conjurers, unaware of their influence, were teaching physics through laughter. The performer's assistant, a woman dressed in dark blue, steps forward holding a small basket. "The spirits are thirsty," she announces, pouring water into a wooden bowl. With a whisper, she stirs it using a long feather. The water begins to shimmer with faint light. The crowd gasps again. You notice how carefully she tilts the bowl so the sunlight catches the surface at just the right angle. "See," the conjurer says, "faith and sunlight make miracles." He bows again as coins rain into the basket. Researchers who study popular entertainment of Middle Ages suggest that such performances provided more than amusement. They created a safe space for wonder. In a world ruled by fear of the unknown, street magic offered joy without heresy. It reminded people that mystery could exist for pleasure alone, without punishment. The woman passes the basket to a little girl and lets her place a single flower among the coins. The conjurer kneels and accepts it solemnly. "A gift for the muse of mischief," he declares. "She always pays me in laughter." He tucks the flower into his hat and turns to you. "You've been quiet," he says, smiling. "You look like someone who wants to believe but won't admit it." Before you can reply, he flicks his wrist, and suddenly a folded parchment appears in your hand. "For your dreams," he says. You unfold it. Inside is a single line written in neat, looping letters. The simplest trick is seeing what others ignore. You look up, but the conjurer has already moved on, the crowd following him toward another part of the square. His red cloak flashes like fire between the stalls. An old chronicle from Spain tells of a magician who performed before a skeptical bishop. When asked to reveal his secret, he said, "Patience, timing, and the kindness of shadows." The bishop dismissed him, but years later, the same techniques were used by scholars experimenting with optical lenses. Perhaps every trick contains a seed of discovery waiting to grow in the right hands. The sun slips behind the rooftops as the fair begins to close. Vendors pack their goods, and the laughter fades into soft chatter. You walk toward the fountain, hearing the last notes of a lute carried by the wind. The parchment in your hand glows faintly in the fading light, its message simple but profound. You fold it carefully and tuck it into your pocket. As you leave the square, the night gathers around you. Somewhere behind, the conjurer's voice rises one last time. "What is magic, my friends, if not hope, made visible?" The crowd cheers, and for a moment, you feel that he is right. The moon climbs high as you travel again, its light silvering the tops of the trees. The air grows cooler, and the night hums with quiet. You follow the path through open fields until you see a faint glow in the distance, brighter than a campfire, steadier than torchlight. As you draw closer, you realize it is not a village but a solitary tower. Its walls are pale stone, smooth and seamless, and light seeps through narrow windows like molten gold. Inside, someone is awake, working through the long hours of darkness. The door creaks open at your touch, and a wave of warmth greets you. The interior smells of ash, salt, and beeswax. Every surface is covered with books, flasks, and copper instruments. At the center of it all stands a man in a robe of deep brown, his hands steady as he grinds a powder into fine dust. He looks up briefly, eyes bright but calm. "You are just in time," he says. "I have almost finished the mixture." On the table lies a large open manuscript, its ink glinting faintly. You glance at the title written in neat Latin script, De Lapide Philosophorum, the Book of the Philosopher's Stone. The phrase stirs something ancient inside you. Countless seekers have dreamed of that elusive substance said to transform base metals into gold and grant eternal life. For centuries, it has hovered between metaphor and miracle. Historical accounts of alchemy show that the search for the philosopher's stone was as spiritual as it was physical. Practitioners believed that matter mirrored the soul. To purify one was to refine the other. Gold represented perfection, but the true treasure was enlightenment. Those who sought the stone were chasing not wealth but harmony, a unity between human and divine. The alchemist pours the powdered mixture into a crucible and stirs it with a long metal rod. The contents shimmer pale red in the firelight. This recipe, he explains softly, is not mine. It has been copied and changed for generations. Some call it nonsense. I call it prayer. His voice carries no arrogance, only patience. You notice his hands tremble slightly as he adjusts the flame beneath the vessel. An ancient document attributed to Hermes Trismegistus speaks of the prima materia, the first substance from which all things are made. Medieval thinkers reinterpreted this idea, believing that hidden within all matter was a spark of divine perfection waiting to be awakened. The alchemist nods toward his furnace. We seek the same fire that built the stars, he says, only smaller and inside ourselves. A peculiar story from a 17th century alchemist's journal tells of a master who claimed to create a single grain of red powder that could transmute lead into gold. He never revealed the process and died soon after. Some say his success killed him. Others think the story was allegory, describing the transformation of wisdom rather than metal. Either way, the idea of perfection that could be held in the hand never lost its hold on the imagination. The man in front of you removes the crucible from the fire and sets it carefully on a stone slab. The mixture cools and hardens, its color deepening into amber. He studies it silently, the flames flickering across his face. Most fail because they think the stone is outside themselves, he says quietly. It is not. The metals teach us patience, not immortality. He opens a drawer and removes a tiny vial filled with golden dust. This, he says, is all I have ever made that comes close. He shakes it gently, and the dust glows faintly in the candlelight. It shines beautifully but changes nothing, yet it reminds me that pursuit itself has value. Every failure polishes the soul a little more. His smile is soft and sad. According to surviving letters between Renaissance scholars, many alchemists shared this view. They wrote of their laboratories as sacred spaces, where science and meditation became one act. Some described their furnaces as altars and their experiments as confessions. In their solitude, they believed that even the smallest success carried a message from the divine. The alchemist turns a few pages in his book. Diagrams of circles and triangles fill the parchment, each labeled with ancient symbols. Perfection is a circle, he murmurs. It closes itself. We spend our lives trying to find where it begins. He hands you a small fragment of glass, transparent but tinged faintly red. Hold it to the light. You raise it toward the fire. The glass burns with a glow like a captured sunset. That, he says, is the residue of one attempt, beautiful, useless, and holy. The simplicity of his words makes you smile. He watches you for a moment, then adds, people say alchemists dream too much, but all discovery begins with a dream. A letter from an anonymous scholar once described the philosopher's stone as a mirror of the heart. He warned that anyone who sought it for greed would find only ashes. Those who sought it for understanding, however, would glimpse eternity in the reflection. Perhaps the real transmutation was not metal at all, but the transformation of desire into humility. The alchemist places the glass fragment beside his notebook and leans back, sighing. I used to think failure meant the work had ended, he says. Now I think it means the work has begun. The room falls quiet except for the soft hiss of the fire. You feel a stillness settle between you, warm and deep. Outside, the night sky glows with distant stars. Through the narrow window you can see Orion rising, his belt gleaming like a line of molten silver. The alchemist glances toward it and whispers, even the heavens are laboratories. Every star is an experiment in light. He turns down the flame and begins tidying his tools. You should rest, he says. The stone is not found in a single night. His words feel like both advice and benediction. When you step out into the cold, the tower glows softly behind you. The air smells of smoke and resin. In your hand, the red fragment still catches the moonlight, shining faintly like an ember that refuses to fade. You slip it into your pocket, feeling its warmth against your palm. For a moment, you imagine that you are carrying a tiny piece of the eternal fire the alchemist spoke of, still waiting for its next transformation. The path curves along the ridge, and dawn begins to spill over the horizon in a wash of pale gold. The world feels fragile and clear, as if freshly created. Below, the valley stretches wide and quiet, dotted with small villages and winding rivers. You breathe in deeply. The air tastes of frost and pine, sharp enough to wake even the most drowsy soul. Far ahead, you see the outline of a monastery built into the side of the hill, its walls glowing softly in the morning light. Bells begin to ring in measured rhythm, summoning the monks to their prayers. You walk slowly toward the sound. As you approach, the scent of smoke and parchment greets you. Inside the stone courtyard, a line of robed figures moves silently, each carrying a book. Their sandals scuff gently against the cold floor. The monastery is alive with the faint rustle of pages and the low murmur of voices chanting in Latin. The air feels heavy with devotion. Though it is not only faith that lives here, it is knowledge carefully guarded and endlessly copied. Records from medieval abbeys describe how monasteries served as both sanctuaries of prayer and centers of learning. Within their scriptoria, monks copied religious texts by hand, but alongside them they preserved works of science, philosophy, and medicine. By candlelight, generations of scribes kept ancient wisdom from vanishing into oblivion. Their patience built bridges across centuries. A young monk looks up from his desk as you enter. His eyes are tired but kind. "You may sit," he whispers, "but speak softly. The words are listening." His hand moves swiftly across the parchment, quill gliding in smooth strokes. You watch as he pauses to blow gently on the wet ink before continuing. The faint scent of oak gall and iron fills the air. He shows you the page he is copying. It contains a map of the heavens, drawn in careful circles. Tiny golden stars dot the page like jewels. "This was once forbidden," he says quietly, "but now we call it study." His smile is small, wry. Names change faster than truths. A fragment from a 12th century chronicle confirms his words. Certain books of astronomy were once hidden behind false covers labeled as devotional texts. A single diagram of the cosmos could raise suspicion. Yet the monks who copied them understood that the sky itself was a form of scripture, one written by creation rather than by man. You watch the monk sharpen his quill with a small knife. "Every letter must breathe," he murmurs. "Too much pressure, and the word dies." His attention to detail borders on reverence. Around him, other scribes work in silence, their faces illuminated by flickering light. The sound of scratching quills fills the room like rain on dry leaves. A curious detail from the records of the Abbey of Cluny notes that some monks believed copying sacred texts purified the soul. Every mistake was confessed, every correction an act of humility. They called their desks altars of ink. It is easy to imagine the same devotion here, each page a prayer written through patience. The young monk gestures toward a shelf of finished manuscripts. Their covers are bound in leather, embossed with symbols of vines and stars. "We send them to distant places," he says. "Some go to kings, others to scholars, but most are read only by the next generation of monks. We copy not for fame, but for continuity." His eyes soften. The world forgets easily. Ink remembers. An entry from an old abbot's journal tells of nights spent arguing whether preserving pagan wisdom was sin or service. One monk insisted that even the words of non-believers could glorify God by revealing his creation. Another disagreed, calling such curiosity temptation. The argument ended not with a verdict, but with more copying. Debate itself became part of devotion. The monk beside you sighs softly. "Sometimes I wonder if we are saving knowledge or burying it." His voice carries a quiet sadness. "Books should speak, but ours mostly sleep." He dips his quill again and writes in small, steady letters, each one immaculate. Still, it is better to keep silence than to let memory die. Some historians argue that the monastic scribes of Europe unintentionally laid the foundation for the scientific revolution. By preserving texts from Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world, they passed knowledge forward to a time ready to question it again. Others claim they were simply caretakers, not innovators. Yet without their patience, the chain of human thought would have broken long ago. You move closer to the window, where the early sunlight spills across a row of books. Dust dances in the beam, each speck glowing like a tiny planet. The monk follows your gaze. That dust, he says, is the breath of centuries. When we open a book, we inhale time itself. He closes his manuscript and ties it with a thin strip of cloth. When I was young, he says, I wanted visions and miracles. Now I find them here, in the shape of letters. He smiles faintly. Words are the only magic I trust. A peculiar note found in an English priory mentions a monk who decorated his manuscripts with hidden symbols: a tiny bird, a serpent, a single flower in the margin. He said these marks kept the pages alive. Perhaps he was right. The monk beside you does something similar. At the bottom of his page, he draws a small spiral, subtle and perfect. That, he says, is for continuity. It reminds the next scribe that the work never ends. The bells ring again, calling the monks to the refectory. The room empties slowly, leaving behind the faint smell of ink and candle smoke. You linger a moment, looking at the rows of books that line the walls. Each one holds the echo of hands, the patience of eyes, and the steady rhythm of hearts that once beat in time with thought. When you step outside, the air feels crisp and bright. The chant of morning prayer drifts across the courtyard, low and resonant. It mingles with birdsong, creating a harmony that feels older than memory. You walk away slowly, hearing the rhythm of quills still echoing in your mind. Somewhere behind you, the monk continues to write, each stroke of his pen keeping the fragile flame of knowledge alive. The road descends from the monastery into a valley wrapped in fog. Morning light seeps slowly through the mist, turning the field pale silver. The sound of a stream follows you, winding beside the path like a constant whisper. You walk until you reach a wooden bridge, its planks slick with dew. Beyond it lies a small stone cottage with smoke curling gently from the chimney. The door is half open, and from inside comes the soft ringing of metal on glass. You step closer and find an elderly man bent over a table crowded with jars and tools. He wears spectacles so round and thick they magnify his eyes into small moons. When he notices you, he chuckles quietly. Careful where you stand, he says. Light has a habit of escaping when you're not looking. He gestures for you to come in. The room smells of heated metal, candle wax, and something faintly sweet, like honey left in the Sunday. On the table sits a brass frame holding a curved lens. The old man adjusts it carefully until a beam of sunlight streaming through the window lands directly upon a scrap of parchment. Instantly, the paper smokes. Focus, he says, smiling. That's the key to everything. He moves the lens again, this time projecting a tiny image of the window onto a white cloth. The world can be folded into itself, he murmurs, if you know how to bend light. Historical notes from the 13th century record similar experiments by scholars such as Roger Bacon, who studied mirrors, refraction, and the properties of light. Long before the invention of the telescope, thinkers were already exploring how glass could magnify sight and bend perception. Their discoveries blurred the line between science and sorcery. To watch light behave like liquid must have felt like commanding the sun itself. The man picks up a small mirror polished to a flawless shine. This, he says softly, is my favorite instrument. Mirrors tell the truth, but only if you ask the right question. He angles it toward the window, filling the room with moving patterns of reflected light. The beams ripple like living things dancing across the ceiling. People think I chase visions, he says. Really, I chase patience. A curious note from a Venetian craftsman's diary describes how early opticians learned to grind lenses for spectacles. The process was slow and required both strength and tenderness. Each imperfection changed the way the world looked. Those who mastered the craft were sometimes accused of unnatural power. After all, to correct the weakness of human sight was to meddle with what many believed divine. The old man adjusts another device on his table, a darkened glass sphere filled with water. The sunlight passes through it, casting a rainbow onto the wall. Every color hides a lesson, he explains. Red teaches courage, blue teaches calm. Together they remind us that truth is never a single shade. He smiles, clearly amused by his own philosophy. Some scholars have argued that medieval experiments with prisms and lenses marked the first steps toward modern optics. Others insist that their purpose was still mystical rather than scientific, aimed at understanding divine illumination. In truth, both motives often lived side by side. Curiosity, like light, refuses to stay in one shape for long. He sets aside the glass sphere and brings out a small wooden box. Inside lies what looks like a tiny model of the cosmos, concentric rings of brass, each etched with delicate markings. An armillary sphere, he says proudly, a map of the heavens small enough to fit in the palm. He turns the rings, and they click softly as they rotate. I made this when I was young. It taught me how much of the world is motion pretending to be stillness. A record from a Paris workshop mentions that artisans who built such instruments often hid their names. Their designs were used by scholars and astrologers alike, yet their craftsmanship remained anonymous. For them, creation itself was the reward. To shape the universe in miniature was to take part in its divine architecture. The old man wipes dust from a shelf filled with curious artifacts, shards of colored glass, fragments of mirror, thin copper wires. Each of these caught light once, he says. Now they rest. Even brilliance must sleep. His voice softens. We chase knowledge, but it is light that chases us. He hands you a small magnifying lens, its brass edge warm from the Sunday. Take it, he says. Use it to look closer, not farther. You hold it up and study the lines of your own hand. Every ridge, every scar, every speck of skin becomes a landscape. The sight is strangely humbling. That's the secret, he says gently. The universe repeats itself at every scale. The stars are not so different from fingerprints. A fragment of writing attributed to Bacon contains a similar thought, that the smallest spark of understanding mirrors the vastness of creation. The man before you, whether he knows that text or not, embodies the same idea. His workshop feels like both laboratory and chapel, filled with tools that are also prayers. The sunlight fades slowly, and the colors on the wall dissolve into soft grey. The old man removes his spectacles and rubs his eyes. Even the sun tires, he murmurs. But tomorrow it will return, and so will I. He begins to cover his instruments with cloth. Light is a teacher with endless patience. It waits for us to notice it again. Outside, the mist has lifted completely. The air smells fresh and sharp. You glance back once more at the cottage, its windows still glimmering faintly. Inside, the old man moves like a shadow, tidying his table, humming under his breath. The world feels lighter now, as if his lessons have folded the sunlight into your thoughts. You continue along the path, holding the lens up to the sky. The glass catches the fading rays, splitting them into color before letting them go again. You realize that every bit of light you have ever seen is older than your own breath, born in the same fire as the stars. The thought fills you with quiet awe. Somewhere behind you, the old man's laughter echoes faintly, as if the world itself is amused by its own brilliance. The last of the fog fades as afternoon spreads across the hills. The path leads toward a sprawling garden surrounded by a low wall of stone. Inside, the air is fragrant with rosemary, lavender, and thyme. Bees drift lazily among the blossoms, and the hum of their wings feels like a kind of music. A woman kneels by a bed of sage, trimming the stems with a small knife. When she looks up, her eyes are clear and steady. "Welcome," she says softly. "You have arrived at the Garden of Balance." Her voice carries the calm rhythm of someone who has spent a lifetime listening to the seasons. She rises and brushes dirt from her hands. "Everything alive teaches us something," she continues, but only if we listen with both patience and humility. She leads you down a narrow path lined with rows of herbs. Some are green and tender, others grey and woody, their scents mixing in the warm air. The garden feels like a living library, every leaf whispering a different secret. In the Middle Ages, gardens such as this were both pharmacies and sanctuaries. Monks, nuns, and healers cultivated plants for medicine, food, and spirit. They believed that the Creator hid cures for every ailment in the soil. Physicians studied the doctrine of signatures, which claimed that the shape or color of a plant revealed its purpose. Red flowers for blood, yellow roots for the liver, heart-shaped leaves for the heart. Though modern science would later challenge such ideas, the method reflected a profound faith in nature's symmetry. The woman hands you a small sprig of mint. For clarity, she says. The scent is sharp and clean. The mind wanders less when the air smells honest. You smile, and she gestures toward a shaded corner of the garden where an old stone basin catches the trickle of a small spring. That water, she explains, has flowed here for longer than the house itself. Every generation has drawn from it. It remembers our thirst. A surviving account from a 15th century herbalist describes water as the blood of the earth. He advised that all remedies begin with pure water, for corrupted wells breed corrupted thoughts. His words suggest that medicine in this age was as much moral as physical. Healing the body meant realigning it with the harmony of nature. The woman kneels by the basin and drops a few petals into the water. They swirl gently before settling. There, she says quietly, a reminder that beauty must dissolve before it heals. Her movements are slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Alchemy may speak of metals, she adds, but true transmutation happens in the soil. She leads you to a table shaded by grapevines. Clay jars line its surface, each labeled in careful handwriting. Chamomile for peace, rue for protection, yarrow for wounds. She opens one jar, releasing the sweet, earthy scent of dried petals. This one, she says, I call the companion. It steadies the heart when loneliness grows too large. You notice that her labels contain both practical and emotional uses, as if body and spirit are treated with equal care. A curious entry in a medieval medical manuscript supports this philosophy. It describes a balm for the heart, made from violet syrup and honey. The writer claimed it cured grief as effectively as fever. To modern readers, it sounds poetic, but perhaps the healer understood something timeless, that sweetness, taken slowly, can mend more than the flesh. The woman pours a cup of herbal infusion and offers it to you. The liquid is pale green and fragrant. You sip, and warmth spreads through you. Healing is conversation, she says gently. The plants speak quietly, but they always answer. She touches a small ivy leaf curling up the table leg. Even this one knows how to climb out of shadow. There is a moment of silence filled only by the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. You feel as though the garden itself is breathing with you. She closes her eyes briefly, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in simple gratitude. People think the earth is beneath us, she says, but really, it holds us up. Every root remembers our weight. A letter from a nun in a Cistercian convent echoes her words. To tend a garden, she wrote, is to rewrite creation with gentleness. She believed that caring for plants taught the same virtues as prayer: patience, humility, and reverence for life's cycles. The woman in front of you might have been her twin in spirit, centuries apart. She walks toward a cluster of tall white flowers swaying near the wall. Angelica, she says, good for the lungs, better for courage. She plucks one bloom and hands it to you. Chew it when you are afraid. It will remind you that fear has flavor too. Her smile is kind, and the sunlight catches in her hair, making her look almost luminous. Scholars still debate whether medieval herbalists were guided more by observation or superstition. Some argue they relied on trial and error, others that intuition shaped their art. Perhaps it was both. The woman's confidence suggests that knowledge gathered through care is its own kind of science. She pauses at the edge of the garden, gazing toward the horizon where clouds drift like slow ships. Everything that grows here, she says, is part of a story that never ends. I only help it continue. Her words feel both humble and eternal. The wind stirs, carrying the mingled scents of mint and sage. You realize how calm your heartbeat has become, how easy it is to breathe here. The garden hums softly, alive with invisible harmony. When you finally turn to leave, she presses a small pouch of dried herbs into your hand. For rest, she says. Steep it when the world grows too loud. You thank her, and she nods, returning to her work with serene focus. As you walk away, the sun lowers behind the hills. The air glows with the last gold of evening, and the fragrance of the herbs lingers on your clothes. The sound of bees fades into silence, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own steps. You glance back once, and the woman is still kneeling among the flowers, hands moving gently through the green, as if she is stitching the earth back together one leaf at a time. Evening settles like silk over the hills. The wind cools, carrying the smell of damp stone and faint wood smoke from distant cottages. You walk toward a small village perched beside a lake, its surface reflecting the last light of the setting Sunday lanterns glimmer along the docks, swaying gently in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, you hear the rhythmic clang of metal against metal. The sound draws you closer until you reach a low stone forge glowing with steady fire. Inside, a blacksmith works, each swing of his hammer echoing like a heartbeat against the anvil. He pauses when he sees you, wiping his brow with a sooty cloth. His arms are strong, his face weathered, his expression patient. "Come in," he says in a deep, measured voice. The night cools faster when there's company. You step into the warm glow. Sparks leap from the forge like fireflies. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and molten iron. On a table beside him rests an assortment of objects: blades, horseshoes, tools, and something stranger, a small disc etched with intricate symbols. You pick it up, and he nods. "A charm," he explains, "for protection or perhaps for remembrance. Depends on who asks for it." He takes it from your hands and holds it over the flame until it glows faintly red. Iron listens to intention. That's what the old ones taught. In medieval times, blacksmiths were often regarded with a mixture of respect and unease. They worked with fire and metal, shaping the raw materials of the earth into tools that could build or destroy. Some villages whispered that they knew secret prayers to calm the flames. Others claimed their forges were blessed by angels or guarded by spirits. Historical accounts from rural France describe smiths as both craftsmen and protectors, makers of weapons and warders against evil. The man at the forge sets the disc into a basin of water. Steam rises with a hiss. Every object keeps a little of its birth inside it, he says. If you temper it with anger, it remembers. If you temper it with peace, it carries calm. His words sound simple, but you can tell they come from long practice. He hands you the cooled charm, now dark and smooth. "Here," he says. "Touch it. It holds both fire and water now. That's balance." A curious tale from an English chronicle tells of blacksmiths who made nails for church doors on holy days, believing the metal absorbed sanctity from prayer. The same nails, when used in building homes, were said to bring good fortune. Archaeologists have even found tiny iron crosses hidden in the foundations of old cottages, evidence of a faith that mixed the sacred and the practical in equal measure. The blacksmith returns to his work, heating a piece of iron until it glows like sunrise. His hammer rises and falls with slow rhythm, each strike ringing through the air. "I've seen men call this craft magic," he says, not looking up. "But there's nothing magical about fire and patience. The magic is what people feel when they see the shape of their need turned into something real." You watch him work, mesmerized by the harmony of motion and sound. The rhythm feels ancient, almost ceremonial. The hammering becomes a kind of chant, each note resonating in your chest. He quenches the blade, and steam curls upward, filling the room with the scent of iron and rain. That, he says quietly, is the moment I love most, the breath between heat and stillness. Scholars who study medieval craftsmanship often point out that the forge was both workshop and temple. Blacksmiths stood at the intersection of creation and destruction, transforming raw material into meaning. In some regions, they were even called upon to perform blessings, using the sound of hammering as protection against storms. Their trade carried echoes of mythic figures like Vulcan and Wayland, the divine smiths who shaped the destinies of gods and kings. The man sets his hammer down and takes a seat on a wooden stool. "You know," he says, staring into the fire, "I've never forged anything without thinking of someone." He gestures toward a rack of finished tools. That plough for a farmer who lost his old one in a flood, that ring for a sailor's wife, that blade for a knight who swore he would never draw it except in justice. His gaze softens. We all make promises with our hands, whether we realize it or not. A note from a 15th century guild record mentions that blacksmiths often engraved small symbols on their tools, signatures that also served as blessings. Some were simple crosses, others stars or circles. Historians still debate whether these marks were personal emblems or protective charms. Either way, they carried intention, the invisible ingredient in every craft. The blacksmith stands and takes a long iron rod from the coals. "Watch," he says. He draws it out, stretching it thinner with each strike until it glows white at the tip. Then, with a single swift twist, he shapes it into a spiral. "There," he murmurs. "Energy in motion. That's what life is." He cools it quickly, and the metal darkens, the spiral locked in place. Some call it art. I call it remembering. You hold the spiral carefully. It's heavy, yet its curves seem to hum with quiet life. "Keep it," he says. It catches courage. His smile is faint but genuine. The world forgets that courage can be made. Outside, the lake reflects the rising moon. The forge glows behind you like a single star, steady and alive. You can still hear the faint ring of the hammer, echoing across the water long after you've left. The charm in your pocket feels warm, as though the fire within it still breathes. You think of all the hands throughout history that have shaped metal into meaning, the ones who saw no difference between work and wonder. Every blade, every hinge, every small tool carries their silent faith that the world can always be remade, if only with patience and heat. As you reach the edge of the village, the blacksmith's voice seems to drift through the night behind you, carried on the soft wind. "Strength," he says, "is not hardness. It's remembering the fire without letting it consume you." You walk on, feeling the warmth of the charm pulse once more before fading to a steady, living calm. Night falls quietly over the fields, the sky stretching vast and deep above you. The stars bloom one by one, faint at first, then bright enough to cast a silvery haze on the path ahead. The air smells of damp grass and wood smoke drifting from faraway hearths. You walk until the ground rises again, and there, perched on a low hill, stands a stone observatory. Its dome is open to the heavens, a dark mouth drinking starlight. Inside, a man in a long grey cloak adjusts a brass instrument that gleams like honey in the candlelight. He does not look surprised to see you. "You're just in time," he says, voice calm and deliberate. "The sky is unusually clear tonight." He gestures toward the telescope, though it is not the kind you know. It is smaller, simpler, a polished tube with rings of engraved numbers. "Come closer," he invites. "Have a look." You peer through the glass and gasp softly. The moon fills your vision, enormous and brilliant, its craters sharp as fingerprints. The sight makes you forget the cold. "She never sleeps," the astronomer says, smiling faintly, "even when the rest of us dream." From surviving medieval manuscripts, we know that scholars watched the skies long before telescopes were perfected. They used quadrants, astrolabes, and charts to measure the movements of the stars. Astronomy was both science and devotion, a way to read the handwriting of creation. To study the heavens was to glimpse the architecture of the divine. The astronomer takes a parchment from the table covered with circles and lines. This, he says, is the dance of the planets. His quill moves with elegant precision, tracing the paths of Mars and Venus. People think of the sky as distant, but it's as alive as the soil. Every movement above echoes a rhythm below. He looks at you, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. That's why wizards studied the stars, not to predict fate, but to understand harmony. A curious story from Persia tells of an astrologer who could forecast eclipses centuries in advance. When asked if that made him a prophet, he replied, "No, just a patient reader." His humility was rare in an age that feared knowledge as temptation. Even so, rulers sought his counsel. They understood that someone who could read the heavens might also read the hearts of men. The astronomer turns back to his instruments, adjusting a small brass wheel marked with tiny runes. This piece, he explains, came from Alexandria, or so my teacher claimed. Whether or not it's true, the idea comforts me that every discovery carries a trace of all who came before. He pauses, smiling. Knowledge, like light, travels farther than its makers ever imagined. Scholars today still debate whether medieval astronomers believed in astrology as literal influence or poetic connection. Some argue that they saw the stars as forces shaping human lives. Others believe they treated them as symbols, reflections of divine order. Whatever the case, their calculations were astonishingly accurate. In a world ruled by uncertainty, the stars offered the first form of consistency. The astronomer unrolls another parchment. It is filled with delicate drawings of the zodiac, each figure surrounded by tiny annotations. People laugh at these now, he says. They think we believed the stars controlled us. But that's not quite it. We believed the stars reminded us. They hold up a mirror. That's all. His tone is patient, thoughtful. Look at Orion, for example. He rises every winter, just when the world feels most asleep. He is a lesson in endurance. A peculiar detail from a 14th century chronicle mentions a night when monks at Canterbury claimed to see a fiery cross in the sky. Some took it as a warning of war, others as a sign of divine grace. Historians now think it was a rare meteor shower, but at the time, it became legend. The astronomer chuckles softly when you mention it. The sky loves a good story, he says. We are the ones who insist on endings. He lifts a small instrument, shaped like a ring, and holds it up to the candlelight. An astrolabe, he says. This tells me where I stand in the world. He aligns the ring with a star, then lowers it. Imagine, he says, measuring distance not in miles but in wonder. He sets it gently on the table. That's what this work really is, measuring wonder. You ask him if he ever tires of watching the same stars every night. He smiles. The stars never repeat themselves. Even when they return differently. A cloud, a season, a breath of wind all change the story. He glances upward through the open dome. Besides, he adds, they remind me how small I am, and that is a kind of peace. An account from a monastery in Spain records a monk who built his own observatory on the roof of the abbey. He spent every clear night charting constellations and writing poems about them. One line survives. To watch the sky is to feel God thinking. Perhaps this astronomer would agree. He hands you a cup of spiced wine, still warm from the fire. Drink, he says. It helps the mind travel further. The taste is sweet and smoky, the warmth spreading through you. He turns his gaze to the horizon, where a faint ribbon of light hints at dawn. Do you see? He asks quietly. That glow is the world beginning again. You follow his gaze. The stars fade slowly, surrendering to the soft blue of morning. People think day replaces night, he says, but really they share the same light. The sun and the stars are family. We simply forget to look. The observatory fills with the smell of cooling metal and parchment warmed by candle flame. The astronomer begins to tidy his tools, humming under his breath. I used to think I was learning about the heavens, he admits. Now I think I'm learning how to look without fear. Outside, the first bird calls ripple through the still air. You step into the chill and look back. The observatory stands quiet now, its dome closing like an eyelid. The last glow of the candle flickers once in the window before vanishing. You keep walking, the echo of his calm voice lingering in your thoughts. The sky above brightens, but you can still see one last star, pale yet stubborn. You think of his words, measuring wonder. Perhaps that is what all the seekers and wizards were doing, in their own ways measuring wonder, learning patience, tracing beauty until it revealed itself as truth. Morning spills across the landscape in ribbons of gold. The chill fades, replaced by a soft warmth that carries the smell of wildflowers and tilled soil. You walk along a dirt path that winds through fields of wheat rippling like a golden sea. Birds swoop low, and somewhere in the distance a shepherd calls to his flock. The rhythm of life here feels older than language, steady and unhurried. For the first time in many nights, you sense that the world itself is exhaling. Ahead, a small village nestles beside a low hill. Smoke curls lazily from its chimneys, and the faint sound of laughter drifts from a courtyard. When you arrive, you find people gathered around a large wooden table, their hands busy carving, weaving, and painting. Children run between them, scattering bits of straw and colour. This is not a festival, but something quieter, a day of making. A woman notices your curiosity and smiles. "We craft for the season," she says. "When the earth changes, we must answer." She gestures toward her work, a small figure shaped from straw and twine. Its face is simple, its body tied neatly with ribbons. "For good harvests," she explains. "Every home keeps one. It reminds us to give thanks before we take." Historical notes from rural Europe confirm such traditions. Farmers and artisans created small figures or tokens each season, blending practical rituals with symbols of gratitude. They were not worship but remembrance, ways to acknowledge nature's cycles. Some called them charms, others called them gifts. In these customs, everyday life and quiet faith intertwined until they became indistinguishable. You sit beside an older man who is carving an intricate box from oak. The shavings fall in curls at his feet. "This is for my daughter's wedding," he says, his voice calm. "I carve a blessing into every surface so it will last longer than my words." He points to the inside of the lid, where faint lines form the shape of a tree. Roots for strength, branches for hope. His hands move slowly, sure of their purpose. A letter written by a 15th century craftsman contains a similar sentiment. "We work not for coin alone," it reads, "but to leave the world one shape more beautiful than before." The craftsman's words remind you that every act of creation, however small, becomes a kind of offering to time. The villagers around you hum as they work. One paints patterns on clay jars, spirals and dots that seem to move when the light shifts. Another woman weaves a garland of wheat and cornflowers, her fingers deft and precise. "Each knot holds a wish," she says. "We hang them by the door, so the wind remembers us kindly." Archaeologists have found traces of such rural rituals carved into barns and doorframes, sun symbols, protective circles, and delicate etchings meant to keep misfortune away. Scholars debate whether these marks were remnants of pagan belief or simple gestures of hope. Perhaps they were both. Human hands have always needed to turn fear into form. A child runs up holding a small clay whistle shaped like a bird. When he blows into it, the sound is clear and sweet. The villagers cheer softly. "He made it himself," someone says. The boy blushes with pride, and for a moment, the entire square seems brighter. The woman beside you laughs. "See," she says, "even joy can be built." In many parts of medieval Europe, communal craftsmanship was more than economy, it was social glue. People gathered to repair tools, spin wool, or carve charms, but also to share stories. The boundary between work and art blurred easily. Every task carried rhythm, every rhythm a touch of music. In such gatherings, wisdom was passed without lectures, carried in songs, gestures, and memory. A curious account from a traveller in Brittany describes a midsummer night when villagers burned wooden wheels filled with straw and herbs, rolling them down hills to bless the fields. The practice was said to chase away disease and invite rain. To an outsider, it may have seemed superstition, but to those who watched, it was poetry made from motion and flame. The man beside you finishes his carving and sets down his knife. "It's the shape of love," he says quietly, solid, but never still. He runs his fingers over the grain of the wood, as if feeling the heartbeat of the tree that once lived within it. "We take from the earth," he says, "so we must also give it meaning." His words stay with you long after the echo of his voice fades. The villagers begin to tidy the tables as the sun sinks lower. Someone lights a small fire in the square. Its smoke rises straight into the evening air. People gather around it, holding their finished works close to the warmth. One by one, they lift their hands toward the sky, not in worship, but in quiet gratitude. A record from a monastery describes similar gatherings, where monks and farmers would share meals after a day's labor, giving thanks for both the work and the rest that followed. The line between sacred and ordinary blurred until both became one rhythm of living. You stand beside the fire, feeling its heat against your skin. The light flickers over the straw figures, the carved wood, the painted jars. Every object seems alive with intention. You realize that magic may not always require mystery. Sometimes it exists simply in attention, in the act of shaping something with care. The woman who greeted you earlier hands you a small piece of ribbon dyed deep blue. "For your next journey," she says. "Tie it to something you wish to remember." You thank her and tuck it safely into your pocket. When you finally walk away, the firelight fades behind you. The fields rustle softly under the first breath of night. You imagine the villagers' laughter lingering in the air, rising with the smoke to join the stars. The blue ribbon feels light against your hand, carrying the faint scent of dye and summer wind. You understand now that every creation, no matter how humble, leaves a trace of its maker, a quiet promise that beauty will continue, as long as someone remembers to make it. By late afternoon, clouds gather above the fields, their shadows drifting slowly across the hills. The wind grows cool again, and the air smells faintly of rain. You follow the winding path toward a wide lake fringed with reeds. The surface is smooth, broken only by ripples from a single swan gliding through the water. On the opposite bank stands a cluster of low stone buildings crowned with flags that flutter softly in the breeze. You cross a narrow bridge and hear voices echoing from inside the largest hall. When you enter, you find a circle of scholars seated around a long wooden table. Scrolls, maps, and astrolabes are scattered across its surface. Their robes vary in color and design, some plain, others richly embroidered. One of them, an older man with a white beard, looks up and gestures for you to sit. "We meet here each year," he says, "to share what we have learned and what we have not." His tone carries both gravity and warmth. A young woman beside him unrolls a map covered in markings of ink and charcoal. "The trade routes," she explains, "follow the stars. The winds mirror their movement." Another scholar adds, "Alchemy, medicine, and navigation, they are all threads of the same cloth." They speak with ease, finishing one another's thoughts as if weaving a single fabric of ideas. Historical accounts reveal that such gatherings, though rare, did exist. They were informal councils of knowledge, where travelers, healers, astronomers, and philosophers exchanged discoveries outside the reach of kings or clergy. These circles functioned like quiet constellations across Europe and the Near East, passing information in coded letters and shared symbols. One scholar opens a wooden chest and removes a crystal sphere no larger than an apple. Light scatters through it, painting the walls in pale color. "This came from Venice," he says softly. "The glassmakers call it frozen light. We use it to test refraction." He places it on the table, and the others lean closer. The young woman smiles. "We use it for meditation," she says. "It reminds us that clarity is not always transparent." Their laughter fills the room, low and genuine. A curious detail from a 15th century journal describes a similar meeting held in a monastery cellar, where scholars from different lands compared notes on astronomy and language. They spoke in whispers, translating ideas across Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew. The writer noted that no single tongue could hold all truth. The sentiment echoes through this hall even now. The older man at the table speaks again. We are called wizards, sages, dreamers, he says, but we are only listeners. The world hums its music. We are tuning our ears. His hands rest gently on a weathered book filled with equations and symbols. There is power in names, he continues, but more in understanding what cannot be named. Some historians call these councils the roots of the Renaissance. Others describe them as myth. Perhaps they were both, meetings half real, half remembered, where imagination and intellect met as equals. What matters is that their legacy remains the idea that knowledge grows through conversation, not conquest. A younger scholar at the edge of the table, barely more than a boy, speaks for the first time. My master taught me that every question is a candle, he says shyly. One light becomes another. The room falls quiet, and the older man nods. Yes, he replies. And when the last candle burns out, dawn will already be waiting. You sit among them as they share their findings. A new herb found in the mountains that soothes fever, a method for measuring distance with shadows, a strange tale of stones that sing when struck. Each story is offered like a gift, its purpose not possession but continuity. One woman describes a dream she had during her travels, of a library built from glass where every page shimmered with stars. The others listen in reverent silence. Perhaps that library already exists, one suggests. Perhaps we are only remembering it. They all smile at the thought. In surviving correspondence between scholars of this era, such poetic exchanges appear frequently. Logic and imagination were not rivals, they were companions. To dream was to think, and to think was to dream with purpose. The candles burn lower, the lake outside glows with reflected starlight, and thunder murmurs somewhere beyond the hills. The scholars begin to pack their tools, tying scrolls with ribbons, wrapping instruments in cloth. The older man extinguishes the final candle and looks at you. Knowledge, he says, is not meant to be kept. It must travel, like light. You follow them outside as the first drops of rain fall. The scent of wet earth fills the air. The group disperses quietly, each scholar taking a different road into the night. You watch their lanterns fade one by one, until only the sound of rain remains. There is something profoundly human about the image. A handful of people gathered in the dark, trading ideas like small embers, trusting that those sparks will survive long after they themselves are gone. The thought makes you smile. You pick up a small stone from the path, still warm from the day's sun, and slip it into your pocket. As you begin to walk again, lightning flickers behind the clouds, illuminating the hills in brief flashes of silver. The rain intensifies, steady and rhythmic. You pull your cloak tighter and keep moving, each step echoing softly on the soaked earth. Somewhere behind you, the lake gleams faintly, holding the memory of that circle of light, the last gathering of wizards before the world began to call them scientists. The storm passes quietly in the night. By morning, the air feels washed and new, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and wild mint crushed beneath your boots. Mist drifts lazily across the fields, clinging to the edges of trees like silk. You walk slowly, following the soft rush of a nearby river, until you reach a clearing where sunlight filters through in gentle streams. The world around you glows with that rare stillness that follows rain, when every leaf seems to hold its breath. At the center of the clearing stands a lone figure wrapped in a grey cloak. Their back is to you, and they are tracing patterns in the mud with the tip of a staff. When they turn, their face is calm and lined with years, their expression serene. You've walked far, they say softly. The road remembers your steps. You realize this must be the last of the old wanderers, the keepers of forgotten knowledge, who move unseen through the folds of history. The air around them feels lighter, as if their presence balances the world. I've been waiting, they continue. Not for you, but for anyone who still listens. They gesture for you to sit beside the river. The water glimmers with fragments of light, each ripple catching the sun like a whisper of glass. The first magic, the figure says, was silence. Before words, before spells, there was the quiet between heartbeats where everything began. Their voice carries the weight of centuries, but it soothes rather than commands. Every secret the old wizards kept was meant to return to silence someday. That is how the circle closes. Historical records from later centuries describe such mystics as the last guardians of oral wisdom. They wandered from village to village, teaching through riddles, songs, and small acts of kindness. Some called them philosophers, others beggars, but to those who listened, their words lingered like echoes of ancient truths. The figure stirs the water with the staff, creating spirals that dissolve almost instantly. We forget, they say, that knowing too much is another form of blindness. Wizards learned this the hard way. They built towers to reach the sky, only to realize that the sky had already been within them. You feel the truth of that settle in your chest. The world has changed, but the longing to understand it has not. You think of the alchemists and dreamers, the herbalists and blacksmiths, the monks with ink-stained fingers, the astronomers tracing the heavens. Each sought connection, not domination. Each turned mystery into meaning, if only for a moment. The figure smiles as if reading your thoughts. Yes, they say. They were all the same story told with different words. The stone, the fire, the star, the seed, all mirrors of the same longing. They lean closer, lowering their voice. The true secret of the wizards was never hidden in books or formulas. It was this: wonder itself is sacred. A curious note from a Renaissance traveller mentions meeting a hermit who taught a similar lesson. The wise, he wrote, do not try to hold the light. They learn to walk with it. Perhaps this figure before you is that same soul, returned through time in another form. They reach into a pouch and pull out a handful of smooth pebbles, tossing them gently into the river. Each one, they say, is a question. The ripples are the answers. The trick is knowing when to stop watching. Their laughter is soft and kind. You have seen enough to know that secrets are only doors. The key is curiosity, but the home beyond it is peace. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of pine and wet moss. You feel the calm settle deep into your bones. The figure stands, adjusting their cloak. The age of wizards ended when people stopped believing in silence, they say. But their wisdom never truly left. It hides in every craft, every kindness, every gaze that lingers too long on the stars. They step back, letting the light fall fully on their face. Now it is your turn, they whisper. Carry it forward, not the magic, but the attention. Wherever you go, let the world be astonished that you are listening. You blink, and for a moment the figure seems to fade, blending into the mist and the brightness of morning. When you look again, they are gone. Only the sound of the river remains, patient and eternal. You sit for a while, letting the calm soak into you, feeling time itself slow down to a heartbeat. The sky clears completely, revealing a flawless blue. A bird lands nearby, pecking at the ground before taking off again. The rhythm of its wings matches the rhythm of